Hey guys, when we picture work in ancient Rome, it's easy to imagine sweat, dust, and a life spent at someone else's command. But Rome was also a city that ran on paperwork, contracts, measurements, and skilled hands. Some Roman jobs offered real comfort, steady income, and a surprising amount of social mobility. And a few roles, if you had the right education or connections, could place you close to power without ever wearing a uniform or marching a mile. If you enjoy calm, carefully researched history like this, consider subscribing. It helps the channel, and it means you won't miss the next documentary. Now, to understand the best jobs in ancient Rome you'd actually want, we have to begin with an uncomfortable truth. Roman work was deeply unequal. The same city that built aqueducts and amphitheaters also relied on enslaved labor and harsh poverty. So when we talk about desirable employment, we're really talking about a narrow band of roles that combine three things: relative safety, predictable rewards, and enough status to protect you from being treated as disposable. In Rome, that often meant work tied to literacy, specialized knowledge, or control of money and materials. It also meant something else that modern viewers sometimes underestimate: being attached to the right household, office, or network could matter more than raw talent. One of the clearest good lives in Roman working terms belonged to the educated professional, especially those whose skills were portable and in steady demand. Take the physician. Roman medicine was not modern medicine, but trained doctors could do very well, particularly in large towns, army environments, or the households of the wealthy. Many physicians were Greek-speaking and brought traditions of learning that Romans respected, even when they teased Greek culture. A successful doctor might earn fees, receive gifts, and build a client base that kept income flowing. The risks were real, medicine was uncertain, and failure could damage reputation. But compared to backbreaking labor, it was a route to comfort. In the best cases, a physician became not just a healer but a trusted advisor, moving through elite spaces where information and patronage circulated. Another job that looks surprisingly attractive is the role of tutor or grammaticus, the teacher of literature and language. Rome prized education for the freeborn, especially among families aiming to secure public careers for their sons. A respected teacher could find stable employment and, if attached to a prominent household, live in conditions far better than the average city dweller. This wasn't a universally glamorous profession. Many teachers were underpaid, and status varied. But at the top end it offered something precious in Rome: a life built around words rather than muscle, with a daily routine shaped by lessons instead of physical exhaustion. It also came with a quiet kind of influence. Teaching a future senator or advocate meant shaping how Rome's next generation thought, spoke, and argued. If teaching and medicine sat on the knowledge side of Roman society, the administrative world offered another set of desirable roles. The Roman Empire functioned because it wrote things down. Taxes, censuses, property records, legal decisions, military pay, supply lists, and correspondence all required clerks and secretaries. A literate scribe, especially one working for a magistrate, a provincial governor, or an imperial office, could enjoy steady work and proximity to authority. This is the kind of job that doesn't sound exciting until you picture the alternative. Unstable day labor, overcrowded housing, and a constant hunt for food and rent money. Administrative work meant regular tasks, predictable social interactions, and often the protection of an institution. In the imperial period, bureaucratic roles expanded, and being the person who knows how the system works could be its own form of power. Even when an individual clerk wasn't wealthy, The position could offer security, and security was a luxury in Rome. Closely related and even more prestigious was legal work. Roman law was one of the empire's defining achievements, but it wasn't an abstract textbook subject. It was daily life. Contracts, inheritance disputes, property boundaries, marriage arrangements, and business partnerships all ran through legal norms. Advocates and jurists operated in a world where reputation mattered and where persuasive speech could translate into long-term patronage. The best legal minds didn't simply win cases. They became nodes in elite networks, consulted for opinions and rewarded through gifts, introductions, and political backing. This was not a job you stumbled into. It required education, rhetorical skill, and connections. But if you had those, law offered what many Romans wanted most: status without manual labor, and influence without needing to hold dangerous frontline roles. Then there were the people who made Rome's economy move: merchants, shippers, and financiers. Trade in the Roman world was not just a matter of buying and selling. It was logistics across sea lanes, rivers, and roads, with contracts and credit systems that could stretch from Britain to Egypt. A successful merchant could become wealthy, especially if he specialized in high-demand goods like olive oil, wine, grain, textiles, glass, or spices and luxury products coming from farther east. The work could be risky. Storms, banditry, and political instability were real concerns. But merchants who diversified and built relationships with reliable partners could do extremely well. In Roman society, old aristocratic culture sometimes looked down on overt trade, preferring land ownership as a marker of proper status. Yet money had its own persuasive force, and merchants often converted wealth into respectability by funding public buildings, sponsoring festivals, or purchasing land. At the more technical end of commerce sat the money changers and bankers, the argentarii. Rome ran on coinage, but the practical business of lending, exchanging currencies, holding deposits, and financing ventures created opportunities for those who understood numbers and trust. Banking in Rome was not identical to modern banking, but the basic human realities, credit, reputation, paperwork, and enforcement were present. A skilled financier could accumulate wealth and influence, especially in cities with heavy commercial traffic. Of course, public opinion could be suspicious of lenders, and debts could become socially toxic. But from a purely practical, would you want this job perspective, financial work meant indoor labor, literacy, social leverage, and access to information about who was rising and who was falling. Engineering and skilled building trades form another category of Roman work that looks far more appealing than the stereotype of ancient labor. Rome built at a scale that required expertise. Aqueduct gradients, concrete mixes, arches and vaults, road foundations, harbor works, surveying, and urban planning. While much construction relied on hard laborers, the people who designed, supervised, measured, and managed materials occupied a different social tier. Surveyors, for example, were crucial in a world where land boundaries meant taxes, inheritance, and lawsuits. The ability to measure and define space, accurately, publicly, and in ways that held up in court was valuable. Architects and engineers, especially those attached to public projects or elite patrons, could secure stable commissions and strong reputations. They lived in a Rome that rewarded competence because failure in public works was expensive and embarrassing. Even within craft work, certain skilled artisans had lives many modern viewers might recognize as good work. Consider a master metalworker, jeweler, mosaicist, or high-end potter operating in a busy urban market. When an artisan sold to wealthy clients, the job could be profitable and socially connected. Guild-like associations existed in various forms, and workshops could become family enterprises. The work demanded years of training, but it offered pride, identity, and a degree of control over one's day that unskilled laborers rarely had. The best artisans didn't just make objects, they built reputations. In a status-driven society, being known for excellence could protect you in subtle ways, through patronage, referrals, and access to better housing and safer neighborhoods. Now, it's important to pause and clarify what actually want means when discussing Rome. Many roles we've mentioned were only accessible to the freeborn or to those who had already escaped the worst constraints of Roman life. Enslaved people could hold skilled positions, including clerical roles, tutoring, and even medical work, but their personal freedom depended on owners and circumstances. Some did secure manumission and later used their skills to thrive as freedmen, especially in business and administration. Still, the moral reality remains. Rome's economy and comfort were often built on a system that denied basic autonomy to many. When we talk about desirable jobs, we're looking at positions that reduced exposure to the harshest parts of that system, not ones that existed outside it. With that context, one of the most quietly comfortable good jobs in Rome might be the role of household manager or steward in a wealthy home, especially for someone trusted and competent. Large Roman households were complex operations. They involved finances, supplies, staff coordination, property oversight, and client hospitality. A capable steward could live better than many free urban workers, eat more reliably, and enjoy protection because the household depended on them. It wasn't freedom in a modern sense if the steward was enslaved, and even free dependents could be constrained by patronage obligations. But in terms of daily conditions, shelter, stability, proximity to resources, it could be a far safer life than the street economy of the city. Finally, there's one more category that made a Roman working life desirable: jobs attached to public distribution and essential services. Rome, especially the city itself, required constant management of water, sanitation, food supply, and public amenities. Certain roles within these systems, particularly supervisory or specialized technical positions, offered steady work because the city could not function without them. When a job is tied to an essential service, it tends to survive political fashions and economic swings. In a world where sudden price spikes or a patron's downfall could ruin a family, that kind of institutional stability was valuable. So if you could choose, what would the best Roman jobs look like in human terms? They would be jobs where you stayed out of the worst physical strain, where your skills were respected enough to keep you employed, and where your work placed you inside networks of protection, schools, offices, households, courts, workshops, and trade partnerships. Rome was not kind to people without buffers. But for those with literacy, technical ability, or commercial leverage, the empire offered routes to a life that could be not only survivable but comfortable, sometimes even influential, without ever stepping onto a battlefield or into the most punishing forms of labor. If we continue looking carefully at the Roman world, another profession that often provided a surprisingly desirable life was that of the imperial civil servant during the height of the empire. As Rome expanded, especially from the 1st century BCE onward, governance became too complex to rely solely on elected magistrates and aristocratic volunteers. The imperial household and provincial administrations required permanent staff. These roles included record keepers, financial officers, correspondence secretaries, archive managers, and logistical coordinators. For someone with literacy, numeracy, and reliability, this environment could offer remarkable stability. The empire did not stop collecting taxes during political transitions. It did not stop paying soldiers or managing grain shipments because one governor left office. Bureaucratic continuity became essential. If you were part of that machinery, your position could outlast individual rulers. In practical terms, that meant predictable income and long-term security, something rare in a pre-industrial economy. It is also worth considering the grain supply system known as the Annona. Feeding Rome, a city that may have approached 1 million inhabitants at its peak, required extraordinary organization. Grain shipments came from North Africa, Sicily, and Egypt. Warehouses had to be maintained. Weights and measures had to be checked. Distribution lists had to be verified. Supervisory roles within this system carried significant responsibility. While the physical labor of loading ships and hauling sacks was demanding, those managing contracts, inspections, and accounting operated at a different level. They were tied directly to one of the empire's most critical functions. If the grain supply failed, unrest followed. So those who ensured its stability held quiet but meaningful influence. Another path to a comfortable Roman life lay in land management. Large estates, especially in Italy and the provinces, were complex agricultural enterprises. Owners often lived in cities and relied on skilled overseers to manage production of olives, wine, livestock, and grain. A capable estate manager needed knowledge of seasons, soil, storage, and labor coordination. This was not a casual job. It demanded experience and discipline, but in return, it could offer relatively good living conditions, authority over daily operations, and steady standing within a local community. Agriculture formed the backbone of the Roman economy. Being trusted to oversee it could translate into long-term opportunity. We should also consider the role of the public contractor. Rome did not build and maintain its infrastructure entirely through direct state labor. Contracts were awarded for roads, aqueduct repairs, temple maintenance, and public works. Individuals or partnerships who secured these contracts, often called publicani in earlier periods, could earn significant profits. While this field involved financial risk and sometimes public criticism, it also provided one of the clearest routes to wealth outside traditional aristocratic landholding. Those who managed contracts effectively gained both money and influence. In urban settings, certain entertainment-related roles were also more comfortable than modern stereotypes suggest. While gladiators and performers lived precarious lives, the managers, sponsors, and organizers of public games occupied a different tier. Coordinating events required negotiation with suppliers, trainers, animal handlers, and city officials. These administrative roles were less about spectacle and more about logistics. Success could enhance reputation and lead to further opportunities in civic life. It is important, though, to separate admiration from realism. Many Roman jobs that look prestigious from a distance were stressful and politically sensitive. Serving a governor meant exposure to shifting alliances. Handling money meant scrutiny. Even teaching could become unstable if a patron withdrew support. Rome rewarded success, but it did not cushion failure. Reputation mattered intensely. A damaged name could close doors quickly. That said, compared to the lives of dock workers, miners, or field laborers, These administrative and professional roles offered enormous advantages. They reduced physical danger. They allowed intellectual engagement. They created access to networks where information flowed before it reached the public square. And information in Rome as today often meant opportunity. Perhaps the most quietly desirable aspect of many of these jobs was not wealth alone, but insulation. In a society without modern safety nets, insulation from sudden catastrophe was everything. If your work connected you to an institution, the imperial court, a major estate, a municipal council, a respected workshop, you were less exposed to random shocks. When harvests failed or prices rose, you were closer to the structures distributing relief. When disputes erupted, you had connections who might speak on your behalf. In that sense, the best Roman jobs were not always the most glamorous. They were the ones that placed you inside stable systems. They were jobs where literacy, skill, and trust combined to create a buffer against uncertainty. And in a civilization as vast and complex as Rome, that buffer could mean the difference between hardship and a life of measured comfort. If we step back and view the Roman labor landscape as a whole, a pattern becomes clear. The most desirable work clustered around three pillars: knowledge, management, and trade. Knowledge meant education, medicine, law, teaching. Management meant overseeing people, money, or infrastructure. Trade meant moving goods and capital across the empire's enormous geography. All three required competence, reliability, and reputation. For a modern viewer imagining themselves in ancient Rome, the safest choices would likely fall within those categories. Not because Rome was easy, but because these roles aligned you with the empire's core needs. And Rome, for all its inequalities and imperfections, consistently rewarded those who made its vast system function smoothly. In the end, the best jobs in ancient Rome were not about luxury in the modern sense. They were about stability, status, and survival with dignity. In a world without modern labor protections, that combination was rare and deeply valuable. There is another dimension to desirable Roman work that often goes unnoticed: proximity to communication. In an empire that stretched from northern Britain to the deserts of Syria, information moved slowly but decisively. Letters carried political decisions, military orders, trade agreements, and personal favors. Those who handled correspondence, whether as scribes, archivists, or trusted messengers, stood at the crossroads of power and knowledge. The imperial courier system, known as the cursus publicus, was primarily designed for official state business. While ordinary citizens could not freely use it, those employed within its structure occupied a reliable and respected role. Station managers, dispatch coordinators, and record keepers ensured that documents and directives moved efficiently across vast distances. The work required organization and trustworthiness more than physical strength. It connected individuals to the administrative heart of the empire. And once again, being attached to such a system meant insulation from the instability faced by casual laborers. Another surprisingly appealing path could be found in municipal government at the local level. Across the Roman world, cities were governed by councils made up of local elites. While the highest offices required wealth and carried financial obligations, many supporting roles, clerks, treasurers, assistants, were more accessible. A municipal treasurer, for example, handled local tax revenue, public spending, and civic accounts. The position demanded precision and honesty. In return, it offered influence within the city's social structure. Local politics in Roman towns were often less volatile than imperial intrigue. Serving competently at this level could provide a steady career embedded within one's own community. We should also consider the profession of surveyor or agrimensor. Land in Rome was wealth, inheritance, taxation, and identity all at once. Disputes over boundaries were common, especially in newly conquered provinces where veterans received land grants. Surveyors used standardized tools and geometric knowledge to measure fields and settle disagreements. Their expertise was technical and respected, because accurate measurement protected both private property and state revenue. Surveyors performed work that directly supported social order. It was not glamorous, but it was essential, and essential roles tend to be secure. In commercial cities such as Ostia, Alexandria, or Antioch, harbor administration presented further opportunity. Ports were economic engines. Supervisors coordinated dock schedules, cargo inspections, storage allocation, and customs duties. While dock workers endured heavy physical strain, administrative officials within port systems worked in offices and warehouses, managing documentation and trade flows. Their daily routines revolved around calculation and coordination rather than physical hardship. As trade volumes increased during the early empire, these positions gained even greater importance. Even within the military sphere, often associated only with frontline soldiers, there were administrative and logistical roles that offered relative comfort. The Roman army required quartermasters, engineers, paymasters, and medical staff. A legion on campaign depended on supply chains, fort construction, and careful record-keeping. Serving as a military engineer or administrator meant benefiting from the Army's structured pay system and retirement provisions without facing constant combat exposure. Veterans who completed their service received land grants or financial rewards, offering a structured path to post-service stability. It is worth emphasizing that Roman society deeply valued reputation. Many of these more desirable professions were built not only on skill, but on perceived reliability. Trust functioned as a form of currency. A banker trusted with deposits, a steward trusted with property, or a teacher trusted with children all relied on social confidence. Once established, that trust could sustain a career across decades. Conversely, losing it could be devastating. The Roman world did not offer modern legal protections against professional ruin. Integrity was therefore both a moral and economic necessity. When comparing these professions, a clear theme emerges. The best jobs in ancient Rome were those that reduced exposure to unpredictable physical danger, connected you to enduring institutions, and allowed your skills to compound over time. Literacy and numeracy were transformative advantages. Technical knowledge, whether in engineering, surveying, or medicine, offered leverage. Administrative competence placed you within networks that extended beyond a single household or workshop. It is also telling that many of these roles required education that often flowed through Greek cultural channels. Mastery of language, rhetoric, and mathematics opened doors. Rome conquered militarily, but it governed administratively. And governance demanded people who could read, calculate, and organize. For a modern viewer imagining daily life in the Roman world, the appeal of such professions becomes clear. They offered routine rather than chaos. They offered mental engagement rather than relentless physical exhaustion. They provided the possibility, though never the guarantee, of upward movement through patronage, savings, or accumulated reputation. Ancient Rome was not a society built around comfort for the majority. Yet within its vast and unequal system, certain forms of work provided something close to security. And in an ancient context, security was often the highest reward of all. As we move further into the structure of Roman working life, it becomes increasingly clear that one of the most desirable outcomes was not immediate wealth, but long-term positioning. Rome was a civilization built on hierarchy and patronage. The right occupation could slowly reposition you within that hierarchy, sometimes across generations. In that sense, the best jobs were those that created momentum rather than simply covering daily expenses. One such example is the role of the freedman entrepreneur during the early empire. While enslavement was a harsh and unjust system, manumission was relatively common in Roman cities. Skilled enslaved individuals, especially those trained in accounting, trade, or administration, could be freed and continue working in the same field, now earning directly for themselves. Many freedmen entered commerce, shipping, manufacturing, or financial services, because they already understood business operations and often maintained connections to former owners who remained influential patrons. They could expand quickly. In some cases, freedmen accumulated substantial wealth, funding public buildings or sponsoring civic events. Though they rarely achieved the full political privileges of the traditional aristocracy, they could secure comfort and prestige within urban society. Another occupation that offered steady returns was that of tax administration at the provincial level. While large-scale tax farming in the late Republic developed a mixed reputation, the imperial period gradually standardized collection procedures. Officials who assessed, recorded, and supervised tax flows occupied critical positions. These were not glamorous roles, but they were embedded in one of the empire's most reliable revenue streams. As long as provinces produced crops and trade continued, taxes were collected. Serving competently within that structure could provide consistent income and influence, particularly in provincial towns where administrative authority carried visible weight. Urban property management also deserves attention. Rome and other major cities were dense environments filled with apartment buildings known as insulae. Wealthy investors often owned multiple rental properties. Managing these buildings, collecting rent, arranging repairs, ensuring water access, handling disputes, required organization and negotiation skills. For a capable manager, this work meant daily interaction with tenants and tradespeople, along with stable compensation from property owners. While fires and structural problems were constant concerns in Roman cities, property management remained a profitable sector tied directly to urban growth. In the cultural sphere, professional scribes and copyists formed another layer of desirable employment. Rome produced legal documents, business contracts, literary works, and personal letters at a remarkable scale. Copying manuscripts required literacy, precision, and patience. Skilled scribes could work for law offices, administrative centers, or wealthy patrons building private libraries. Though the work demanded concentration, it was conducted indoors and relied on intellectual rather than physical endurance. In a society where literacy was unevenly distributed, this alone made the profession valuable. Religious administration also offered relative stability. Temples in Rome and across the provinces were not only centers of worship but also economic institutions. They managed property, stored offerings, and oversaw ritual calendars. Priestly roles at the highest levels were often restricted to elites, Yet temples required a broader staff: attendants, record keepers, treasurers, and organizers of festivals. Religious festivals were regular and predictable features of Roman life, funded through public and private contributions. Serving within temple administration could therefore offer routine work supported by long-standing tradition. We might also consider the role of mediator or broker in commercial transactions. In a complex economy where buyers and sellers did not always know each other directly, intermediaries facilitated deals. These individuals relied on reputation and networks, introducing partners, arranging contracts, and earning commissions. Because Roman commerce depended heavily on trust and personal relationships, effective brokers could become indispensable connectors. Their income was tied to the health of trade itself, which during periods of stability under the Pax Romana expanded considerably. A common thread unites all of these professions: integration into systems larger than oneself. Rome's durability as an empire rested not only on legions but on paperwork, contracts, infrastructure, and routine exchange. Jobs that aligned with those pillars were more resilient than isolated or purely manual trades. They created relationships that extended beyond a single employer or season. Of course, none of this meant a life free from anxiety. Fires, disease, political upheaval, and economic fluctuation were ever-present realities. But individuals positioned within administrative, financial, technical, or institutional roles were often better equipped to navigate such disruptions. They possessed information earlier, maintained broader networks, and held skills that could transfer from one patron or city to another. When modern audiences imagine the best jobs in ancient Rome, it is tempting to focus only on wealth or spectacle. Yet, for most Romans who achieved comfort, the defining feature of their occupation was durability. It was the quiet advantage of being needed regularly, rather than occasionally. In a civilization that prized order and continuity, the safest path was often found in maintaining the systems that kept Rome functioning day after day. As we bring this deeper into focus, it becomes useful to compare desirable Roman work not just by income or status, but by daily rhythm. One of the clearest differences between harsh and comfortable lives in antiquity was predictability. Did your day follow a structured pattern? Or were you constantly reacting to physical demands and uncertainty? The most appealing jobs in ancient Rome were often those governed by routine. Consider the life of a professional accountant or financial record keeper attached to a large estate, business partnership, or municipal office. Rome's economy required detailed accounts. Inventories of goods, slave registers, crop yields, debt ledgers, shipping manifests, and tax obligations. Someone responsible for maintaining these records operated within a stable environment. The work required concentration, literacy, and mathematical ability, but it did not require exposure to dangerous labor. A skilled accountant could serve the same household or institution for many years, building trust and becoming increasingly indispensable. Over time, that indispensability translated into leverage, better pay, better housing, and greater autonomy. Similarly, the role of librarian or archive custodian, especially in larger cities, offered a measured and intellectual life. Rome valued literature, philosophy, and rhetoric, particularly among elites. Public and private libraries required organization and preservation. Scrolls needed cataloging, storage, and copying. Though this profession was limited to certain urban centers, It represented one of the clearest examples of work centered on knowledge rather than physical strain. For a literate Roman with scholarly inclination, such a role would have provided daily engagement with texts and thinkers in relative calm. Another profession that offered a surprisingly balanced lifestyle was that of a skilled urban shop owner. While many small vendors struggled, established proprietors in busy districts could develop loyal customer bases. A baker with consistent grain access, a cloth merchant sourcing reliable textiles, or a wine cellar connected to regional producers could achieve steady income. Urban commerce depended on repeat trade. Once reputation was established, income could become more predictable. Shop ownership also meant independence. Unlike day laborers, shopkeepers controlled their hours to some degree and could involve family members in the enterprise, strengthening long-term stability. We should not overlook the role of military veterans who transitioned into civilian administration or landholding. Roman soldiers who completed their service honorably often received land grants or financial compensation. Many settled in provincial towns, where their literacy, discipline, and organizational skills made them strong candidates for local administrative positions. Veterans sometimes became municipal officials, estate overseers, or respected community leaders. Their structured military experience translated into civilian reliability. In that sense, the military, despite its risks, could function as a pathway toward later stability. Insurance against poverty in Rome often depended on collective identity. Membership in professional associations, sometimes called collegia, provided another layer of security. While not every association was wealthy or powerful, some organized burial funds, mutual aid, and shared resources. Skilled trades such as builders, shipwrights, or metalworkers could benefit from belonging to such groups. Although physical labor remained part of their work, the collective structure reduced individual vulnerability. Within a collegium, members could support one another during illness or hardship. That social safety net made certain skilled trades more attractive than isolated manual labor. It is also worth reflecting on geographic variation. Not all Roman cities were alike. Life in a provincial town with moderate population and stable trade might be far more comfortable than life in overcrowded Rome itself. Administrative or commercial roles in these smaller centers could combine professional respect with manageable daily demands. In such environments, a municipal clerk, merchant, or surveyor might enjoy a quieter and more secure life than a counterpart in the capital. Across all these examples, one principle remains consistent. The best jobs in ancient Rome minimized unpredictability while maximizing connection. They connected individuals to institutions, to clients, to patrons, or to professional communities. They reduced dependence on sheer physical endurance. And they allowed skills, especially intellectual and managerial skills, to accumulate value over time. When modern viewers imagine stepping into the Roman world, the temptation is to think in dramatic terms. Generals, senators, gladiators. Yet, for most people seeking a stable and respectable life, the quieter professions would have been far more desirable. The administrator who balanced accounts, the surveyor who settled disputes, the merchant who built steady partnerships, or the teacher who shaped young minds, these were the roles that offered a measure of control in a civilization defined by hierarchy and risk. In the end, the best Roman jobs were not necessarily those with the highest titles, but those that offered continuity. And in a society without modern protections, continuity was perhaps the greatest privilege of all. As we reach the broader conclusion of this exploration, it becomes clear that asking which jobs in ancient Rome you would actually want forces us to think carefully about what people valued most in a pre-modern world. Today, we often measure desirable work through salary, personal fulfillment, or flexible hours. In Rome, the hierarchy of needs was more immediate. Physical safety, reliable food supply, protection through patronage, and long-term reputation carried enormous weight. One final category worth considering is the role of advisor or confidant within elite circles. Roman aristocratic households were not only domestic spaces, they were political hubs. Wealthy senators and equestrians relied on trusted associates to review documents, prepare speeches, manage correspondence, and offer strategic counsel. While only a small number of individuals could occupy such positions, those who did were often shielded from the harsher realities of urban life. Their daily routine revolved around consultation and preparation rather than physical labor. They lived close to influence, and proximity itself had value. Being near decision-makers meant early awareness of opportunities and dangers alike. Closely connected to this was the profession of rhetoric instructor. Public speaking in Rome was not a minor skill. It was central to advancement in law and politics. Families invested heavily in rhetorical education for their sons. A respected rhetoric teacher could command high fees and cultivate relationships with ambitious households. Unlike manual trades vulnerable to injury or economic downturn, rhetorical instruction depended on Rome's enduring cultural emphasis on persuasion and civic participation. As long as courts functioned and public life continued, skilled teachers were needed. We might also reflect on medical specialization within military camps and urban centers. Roman medicine included surgeons who treated injuries, ophthalmologists addressing eye conditions, and practitioners specializing in particular ailments. While ancient medicine had limitations, specialization often enhanced reputation. A practitioner known for expertise in a specific field could build a focused and loyal client base. Such professionals worked indoors, developed steady routines, and benefited from repeat demand. In a large city like Rome or Alexandria, that demand could be substantial. Another appealing occupation for those with technical knowledge was hydraulic engineering. Rome's aqueduct system remains one of its most impressive achievements. Maintaining water flow across miles of terrain required ongoing inspection, repair, and measurement. Engineers responsible for these systems were entrusted with infrastructure that directly affected public health and daily convenience. Clean water was not simply a luxury. It was fundamental to urban life. Those maintaining it performed essential work tied to the city's stability. Essential roles, again, meant job continuity. Even within artistic professions, certain paths offered dignity and relative comfort. Skilled sculptors and mosaic artists who secured commissions for temples, villas, and public monuments could enjoy both financial reward and public recognition. High-quality craftsmanship was admired. Although artistic income could fluctuate, successful artisans developed patrons who returned for future projects. Over time, this patronage system created consistency. The work required patience and training, but it did not typically expose practitioners to the grueling conditions faced by miners or large-scale agricultural laborers. What ultimately separates these roles from less desirable ones is not merely income. It is the combination of predictability, skill recognition, and network integration. Rome was a society of relationships. Whether in commerce, administration, or education, your position within a web of mutual obligations determined your resilience. Jobs that strengthened that web were inherently safer. It is important not to romanticize. Even the most comfortable Roman professional lived without modern healthcare, insurance, or labor rights. Epidemics could disrupt cities. Political purges could unsettle administrative careers. Fires could devastate neighborhoods. Yet individuals anchored in skilled, literate, or institutional roles had better chances of recovery. They possessed tools, both practical and social, that others lacked. So if you were transported back into ancient Rome with modern awareness but constrained by its realities, the most sensible choices would likely involve knowledge, administration, or trade. You would aim for work that connected you to enduring systems, courts, schools, estates, temples, ports, or imperial offices. You would seek roles that rewarded precision and trust over brute force. And you would understand that in Rome, as in many historical societies, stability was the truest marker of success. In the end, the best jobs in ancient Rome were not defined by spectacle, but by structure. They were roles that fit neatly into the empire's vast machinery, quietly essential, steadily respected, and protected by the very systems they helped sustain. As a final reflection, it's helpful to imagine what daily life actually felt like inside these more desirable Roman professions. History often records grand achievements. Laws passed, wars fought, monuments built, but the lived experience of work was measured in ordinary hours. And in ancient Rome, the difference between exhaustion and endurance often came down to whether your body or your mind carried the heavier burden. Take, for example, the contrast between a dock laborer unloading grain ships at Ostia and the official overseeing the documentation of that cargo. Both were part of the same economic chain, yet one ended the day physically drained, exposed to injury and irregular wages. The other ended the day reviewing tallies, sealing tablets, and reporting figures to a superior. The second role demanded accuracy and responsibility, but it offered shelter, status, and consistency. That consistency, repeated over years, shaped an entirely different quality of life. The same contrast existed in agriculture. Field labor required relentless physical effort under changing weather. But the estate administrator who tracked yields, negotiated sales, and supervised storage operated at a managerial level. This person needed knowledge of markets and logistics, but avoided the heaviest strain. Over time, experience in such a role could translate into broader opportunities, perhaps oversight of multiple estates, or transition into urban commercial ventures. Even within the legal profession, daily life reflected this pattern. A courtroom advocate prepared arguments, reviewed precedents, and delivered speeches. While public speaking required mental intensity, it offered social prestige. A successful advocate could move through Rome's forums and basilicas with recognition. Reputation itself became a shield, opening invitations and introductions. By contrast, a manual laborer remained largely anonymous, vulnerable to fluctuations in demand. Another advantage shared by many of these preferred professions was the development of transferable skills. Literacy, numeracy, organizational ability, and rhetorical competence could travel. If political circumstances changed in one city, a skilled administrator or teacher might relocate and rebuild. The Roman Empire's shared legal framework and widespread use of Latin and Greek made such mobility possible. In that sense, education functioned almost like portable insurance. It is also important to recognize the psychological dimension of desirable work. Jobs involving planning, analysis, or instruction allowed individuals to see long-term progress. A merchant expanded trade networks. A teacher watched students advance. An engineer completed sections of aqueduct or road. This sense of contribution, visible and cumulative, provided motivation beyond immediate survival. While we must avoid projecting modern workplace ideals too directly onto the past, it is reasonable to assume that meaningful engagement mattered then as now. Roman society certainly imposed rigid hierarchies. Yet within those constraints, people navigated pathways toward comfort and security. Patronage networks, family connections, and education shaped opportunity, but personal reliability and competence also played critical roles. A trusted steward remained employed because dismissal carried risk for the employer. A dependable banker retained clients because financial stability depended on confidence. In this way, professional integrity reinforced personal stability. When we step back from the details, the broader pattern becomes unmistakable. The best jobs in ancient Rome were not defined by leisure alone. They required discipline, skill, and attentiveness. But they offered three invaluable returns: reduced physical danger, embeddedness within stable institutions, and the gradual accumulation of social capital. And perhaps that is the most revealing insight of all. Across centuries and cultures, the characteristics of desirable work show remarkable continuity. Even in an ancient empire built on conquest and hierarchy, people sought roles that balanced effort with security, skill with respect, and ambition with sustainability. Rome's grandeur may capture our imagination through its monuments and military triumphs. Yet the true engine of its endurance was quieter. It was found in the accountant's balancing ledgers, the teachers guiding students, the surveyors measuring land, and the administrators coordinating supply lines. These were the professionals who kept the system steady. If you were choosing carefully, aware of Rome's realities but hoping for a stable and dignified life, you would likely gravitate toward those steady, skilled roles. Not because they promised luxury, but because they offered something far more valuable in the ancient world: continuity. And in a civilization as vast and demanding as Rome, continuity was the closest thing to comfort. Before we close completely, there is one more important angle to consider when thinking about the best jobs in ancient Rome you'd actually want: longevity. Not just how comfortable a job was in your 20s, but whether it could sustain you into middle age and beyond. Ancient work was often unforgiving on the body. Mining, large-scale construction, and agricultural field labor could shorten working lives dramatically. Physical strain accumulated. Injury meant lost income. There were no formal retirement systems for most laborers. By contrast, professions built on skill and knowledge aged differently. A teacher could continue instructing into later years. A legal expert could shift from active courtroom advocacy to advisory roles. A merchant might transition from traveling trade to supervising younger partners. In other words, certain Roman careers allowed experience to replace physical stamina over time. This made an enormous difference in long-term stability. If your work improved as you aged, because you had more contacts, better judgment, or stronger reputation, your earning potential could actually increase rather than decline. That dynamic alone would make professions like law, finance, education, and estate management highly attractive to anyone thinking strategically about survival in antiquity. We should also consider the social dimension of household-based professions. Large Roman households functioned almost like miniature institutions. Beyond the head of household, there were layers of management: stewards, secretaries, tutors, financial overseers, and trusted assistants. For individuals embedded in these roles, the household provided not just employment but protection. Food supply, housing, and security were often tied to service. While this created dependency, it also reduced exposure to the volatility of urban markets. In uncertain times, grain shortages, political transitions, or outbreaks of disease, being attached to a stable and wealthy household could mean the difference between hardship and survival. In that sense, some of the best Roman jobs were those that integrated your livelihood into a larger, resource-rich structure. Another factor that made certain professions appealing was visibility without vulnerability. A respected architect, physician, or scholar might be publicly known, yet not directly exposed to the political rivalries faced by high-ranking magistrates. They benefited from recognition but avoided the full weight of public office. For many Romans, that balance, status without constant political risk, would have been ideal. Even commercial life offered this gradient. A wholesale merchant managing contracts from a warehouse had a different daily experience from a sailor braving Mediterranean storms. Both participated in trade, but one operated from relative safety. The further your role moved toward coordination and planning rather than physical transport, the more comfortable your life likely became. It is also telling that many inscriptions from the Roman world commemorate professions with pride. Tombstones frequently mention occupations: physician, teacher, merchant, banker, surveyor. This suggests that skilled work formed part of personal identity. In a hierarchical society, professional recognition mattered. Being known for competence provided dignity, even within strict social boundaries. If we step back and summarize the pattern one final time, the best jobs in ancient Rome shared several consistent traits. They relied on literacy or specialized knowledge. They connected individuals to durable institutions such as the army, municipal government, temples, estates, or trade networks. They reduced exposure to direct physical hardship, and they allowed reputation to accumulate over decades. Rome was not an egalitarian society. Access to education, patronage, and opportunity was uneven. Yet within its constraints, pathways to relative comfort absolutely existed. The empire's administrative complexity created demand for skilled minds. Its vast trade networks created room for commercial growth. Its legal and educational culture rewarded rhetorical ability and organization. So if you were imagining yourself there, not as an emperor or a general, but as an ordinary person seeking the most stable and respectable life possible, you would likely choose a role that kept you close to systems rather than at their edges. You would aim to be the person who recorded the shipment, not the one unloading it. The one drafting the contract, not merely signing with a mark. The one supervising construction, not carrying the stone. In the end, the most desirable Roman jobs were those that placed you in the quiet center of the empire's machinery. Not glamorous, not always powerful, but steady, respected, and resilient. And in a world without modern safety nets, resilience was the greatest advantage of all. As we draw this full picture together, one final perspective helps us understand why certain Roman jobs stand out as genuinely desirable. They offered agency within structure. Ancient Rome was rigidly organized. Social class, family background, and legal status shaped opportunity from birth. Yet within those boundaries, some professions allowed individuals to exercise judgment, creativity, and influence in meaningful ways. Consider once more the architect or engineer working on public infrastructure. Beyond technical measurement, such a role required problem-solving. Aqueduct routes had to account for terrain. Bridges had to balance materials and environmental pressures. Urban planning required foresight. These were not repetitive, mindless tasks. They demanded applied intelligence. For someone inclined toward analytical thinking, such work would have offered both intellectual engagement and public impact. The results: roads, baths, fountains, were visible reminders of one's contribution. The same sense of agency applied to merchants who built long-distance trade networks. Successful traders did more than move goods. They negotiated terms, assessed risks, monitored political developments, and cultivated partnerships across cultural boundaries. In a Mediterranean world unified by Roman rule but diverse in language and tradition, commercial success required adaptability. For individuals with strategic instincts, trade offered room for initiative. It also provided a pathway to financial independence that did not depend entirely on aristocratic lineage. Legal advisors and jurists, too, operated in a realm of structured freedom. Roman law evolved over centuries, shaped by precedent and interpretation. Skilled jurists did not simply repeat statutes. They interpreted them. Their opinions influenced how contracts were enforced and disputes resolved. Intellectual authority in this field could outlast political cycles. Even emperors relied on legal expertise to maintain legitimacy. To hold such knowledge was to participate directly in the shaping of social order. Education formed another channel for long-term influence. Teachers of rhetoric, grammar, and philosophy shaped elite culture. Their students would go on to occupy administrative and political roles. While teachers themselves might not wield formal power, they influenced those who did. In that sense, educational professions offered a quieter but enduring impact. For individuals who valued intellectual life over public office, this would have been a compelling balance. When we compare these paths to the harsher forms of labor, mining in dangerous conditions, quarrying stone, agricultural field work under relentless sun, the contrast becomes even clearer. Physical laborers contributed enormously to Rome's economy, yet their work rarely granted upward movement or security. Injury or illness could end a livelihood abruptly. By contrast, knowledge-based professions created cushions. Skill could compensate for age. Reputation could attract new patrons. Networks could offer second chances. It is also worth remembering that Rome's vast geographic scale created variation in opportunity. Provincial cities often needed administrators, surveyors, merchants, and teachers to replicate Roman systems locally. Ambitious individuals who were not at the very top of society in Italy might find greater prospects in emerging provincial centers. The expansion of Roman citizenship over time further widened these pathways. Ultimately, the best jobs in ancient Rome were not defined by ease alone. They required discipline, learning, and responsibility. But they allowed individuals to live with relative predictability in an unpredictable world. They placed workers inside the empire's durable frameworks: law, infrastructure, trade, education, administration, rather than at the mercy of seasonal or dangerous labor. And perhaps that is the most important takeaway. Rome endured for centuries not only because of its legions, but because of its systems. Those systems needed skilled caretakers. The people who filled those roles lived lives that, while far from modern comfort, offered dignity, continuity, and measured influence. If you had to choose carefully, aware of Rome's inequalities yet seeking the most stable path, you would likely gravitate toward those steady professions. The engineer measuring gradients, the accountant balancing ledgers, the teacher shaping future advocates, the merchant negotiating shipments, the administrator coordinating supply. They were not emperors, they were not generals, but they were the steady hands that kept the Roman world functioning. And in a civilization built on order, being part of that order was perhaps the most desirable job of all. As a closing meditation on this question, it's worth imagining how Romans themselves might have defined a good job. They did not think in modern career terms, but they certainly understood the difference between hardship and advantage. Roman writers frequently contrasted the instability of poverty with the calm that came from steady patronage, property, or professional respect. Security, moderation, and reputation were recurring themes in their literature. For many free Romans, especially in cities, the ideal life combined modest wealth with dependable routine. A respected shop owner who knew his customers, a teacher whose pupils advanced into public life, a physician called regularly to established households. These were figures embedded in the daily fabric of the community. Their work was known. Their names carried familiarity. That familiarity created resilience. In a tightly networked society, recognition mattered. Even modest bureaucratic roles could provide this quiet advantage. A clerk in a provincial governor's office, for example, might never achieve fame. Yet he handled documents that structured taxation, land rights, and civic duties. He interacted with local elites and military officers. His skill lay not in dramatic action but in maintaining order. Such a role placed him inside the flow of authority without placing him directly in its crosshairs. In political terms, that was a safe and strategic position. The same was true for skilled craftsmen who reached the upper tiers of their trade. A master builder trusted with municipal projects, or a mosaic artist commissioned for prominent villas, developed a portfolio of visible accomplishments. Each completed project increased credibility. That credibility could cross city boundaries. Work led to more work. Over time, mastery itself became a shield against instability. We can also consider the symbolic power of land management. Rome's elite idealized agriculture as morally grounding and socially stabilizing. While large estates depended on laborers, the managerial layer above them represented order and productivity. An experienced estate manager ensured harvest timing, storage efficiency, and fair distribution of resources. In years of abundance, he oversaw profit. In lean years, he navigated scarcity. This required judgment and foresight, qualities highly valued in Roman culture. It is important to recognize that many of these desirable roles required literacy, which was not universal. The ability to read contracts, compose letters, and maintain records opened doors across professions. Literacy allowed participation in law, commerce, education, and administration. In a society built on documentation, from tax registers to military rosters, written competence was transformative. It shifted a person from physical to intellectual contribution. Another advantage of these professions was intergenerational continuity. A merchant could pass business connections to a son. A teacher might educate his own children into similar roles. An administrator could mentor a successor. Unlike day labor, which ended each evening with no guarantee of tomorrow's income, skilled and managerial work often built legacies. In Roman society, where family honor and continuity were central values, this mattered deeply. In the end, when we ask which jobs in ancient Rome you would actually want, the answer becomes less about glamour and more about positioning. You would want a role that made you necessary, not temporarily useful, but consistently needed. You would want a profession where your skill deepened over time and where your relationships strengthened rather than weakened with age. Rome's world was unequal and often harsh. Yet within its vast structure, there were pathways to stable and dignified lives. They lay in classrooms rather than quarries, in offices rather than mines, in ledgers rather than on loading docks. They were found in management, measurement, negotiation, instruction, and organization. And that may be the most revealing conclusion of all. Even in one of history's most powerful empires, the most desirable work was not defined by spectacle, but by steadiness. The Roman world ran on systems. The people who understood and maintained those systems, quietly, competently, and consistently, held the closest thing antiquity offered to a truly good job. As a closing meditation on this question, it's worth imagining how Romans themselves might have defined a good job. They did not think in modern career terms, but they certainly understood the difference between hardship and advantage. Roman writers frequently contrasted the instability of poverty with the calm that came from steady patronage, property, or professional respect. Security, moderation, and reputation were recurring themes in their literature. For many free Romans, especially in cities, the ideal life combined modest wealth with dependable routine. A respected shop owner who knew his customers, a teacher whose pupils advanced into public life, a physician called regularly to established households. These were figures embedded in the daily fabric of the community. Their work was known. Their names carried familiarity. That familiarity created resilience. In a tightly networked society, recognition mattered. Even modest bureaucratic roles could provide this quiet advantage. A clerk in a provincial governor's office, for example, might never achieve fame. Yet he handled documents that structured taxation, land rights, and civic duties. He interacted with local elites and military officers. His skill lay not in dramatic action but in maintaining order. Such a role placed him inside the flow of authority without placing him directly in its crosshairs. In political terms, that was a safe and strategic position. The same was true for skilled craftsmen who reached the upper tiers of their trade. A master builder trusted with municipal projects, or a mosaic artist commissioned for prominent villas, developed a portfolio of visible accomplishments. Each completed project increased credibility. That credibility could cross city boundaries. Work led to more work. Over time, mastery itself became a shield against instability. We can also consider the symbolic power of land management. Rome's elite idealized agriculture as morally grounding and socially stabilizing. While large estates depended on laborers, the managerial layer above them represented order and productivity. An experienced estate manager ensured harvest timing, storage efficiency, and fair distribution of resources. In years of abundance, he oversaw profit. In lean years, he navigated scarcity. This required judgment and foresight, qualities highly valued in Roman culture. It is important to recognize that many of these desirable roles required literacy, which was not universal. The ability to read contracts, compose letters, and maintain records opened doors across professions. Literacy allowed participation in law, commerce, education, and administration. In a society built on documentation, from tax registers to military rosters, written competence was transformative. It shifted a person from physical to intellectual contribution. Another advantage of these professions was intergenerational continuity. A merchant could pass business connections to a son. A teacher might educate his own children into similar roles. An administrator could mentor a successor. Unlike day labor, which ended each evening with no guarantee of tomorrow's income, skilled and managerial work often built legacies. In Roman society, where family honor and continuity were central values, this mattered deeply. In the end, when we ask which jobs in ancient Rome you would actually want, the answer becomes less about glamour and more about positioning. You would want a role that made you necessary, not temporarily useful, but consistently needed. You would want a profession where your skill deepened over time and where your relationships strengthened rather than weakened with age. Rome's world was unequal and often harsh. Yet within its vast structure, there were pathways to stable and dignified lives. They lay in classrooms rather than quarries, in offices rather than mines, in ledgers rather than on loading docks. They were found in management, measurement, negotiation, instruction, and organization. And that may be the most revealing conclusion of all. Even in one of history's most powerful empires, the most desirable work was not defined by spectacle, but by steadiness. The Roman world ran on systems. The people who understood and maintained those systems, quietly, competently, and consistently, held the closest thing antiquity offered to a truly good job. If we zoom out one final time, the question of the best jobs in ancient Rome becomes a question about how complex societies reward different kinds of contribution. Rome was not sustained by conquest alone. Once territories were absorbed, they had to be governed, taxed, supplied, and integrated. That integration required thousands of individuals whose work rarely appears in dramatic historical narratives, yet whose daily efforts created continuity. Think about the Roman census. Conducted periodically, it recorded property, citizenship status, and military obligations. Behind that process stood enumerators, record keepers, and local officials who gathered and verified information. Accurate data meant predictable taxation and recruitment. Errors could create unrest. So those trusted with census administration carried real responsibility. It was detailed, methodical work, precisely the kind that rewards patience and literacy over brute strength. Or consider customs officials at provincial borders and ports. Rome levied duties on certain goods entering and leaving regions. Monitoring these flows required inspection, accounting, and enforcement. While corruption was always a risk in any pre-modern bureaucracy, a competent customs officer embedded within an organized system could enjoy stable compensation. The role tied directly into imperial revenue, which meant it was unlikely to disappear during times of relative stability. Even the Roman road network offers insight into desirable professions. Roads required ongoing maintenance, surveying surfaces, repairing damage, updating milestones. Supervisory roles in these projects blended technical skill with administrative coordination. A well-maintained road facilitated trade and military movement. Those who ensured its reliability contributed to the empire's cohesion. Again, we see the pattern. Jobs linked to essential infrastructure tended to endure. There is also something to be said about emotional distance from danger. In a society frequently exposed to military campaigns and political rivalry, many individuals would have preferred work that kept them adjacent to power without being directly threatened by it. A financial administrator in a provincial city, for instance, was part of Rome's authority but not necessarily exposed to battlefield risk or senatorial intrigue. That middle ground, important but not conspicuous, offered protection. Over time, as the empire matured, administrative roles became even more structured. The growth of imperial offices created clearer hierarchies and defined responsibilities. Advancement within these systems could be gradual but predictable. Experience led to promotion. Promotion increased income and influence. While not every bureaucrat prospered, the existence of career ladders made certain government roles more attractive than unstable private labor. What is striking is how modern this pattern feels. Even today, people often seek professions that combine skill, institutional stability, and opportunities for gradual advancement. In Rome, the same logic applied. Stability did not mean comfort in a modern sense, but it did mean protection against sudden collapse. If we imagine ourselves living in a Roman city, aware of fire risks, economic swings, and political shifts, we would likely prioritize alignment with durable systems. We would aim for literacy, cultivate reliability, and seek positions embedded in trade networks, administrative offices, educational institutions, or estate management. We would avoid roles dependent solely on physical endurance or seasonal demand. And so the answer remains consistent. The best jobs in ancient Rome were not glamorous positions at the top of the hierarchy. They were roles that balanced effort with insulation. They required competence and responsibility, but rewarded those qualities with continuity. They offered something that, in the ancient world, was profoundly valuable: a measure of predictability. In the quiet offices of governors, in the classrooms of rhetoric teachers, in the counting rooms of merchants, and in the measured calculations of engineers, Rome's daily stability was constructed. The people who held those positions lived lives shaped less by spectacle and more by structure. And in an empire defined by scale and ambition, structure was everything. As we reach the very end of this exploration, it's helpful to remember that ancient Rome lasted, in one form or another, for centuries. Very few empires in history have demonstrated that kind of durability. And durability is never sustained by dramatic moments alone. It is sustained by routine, by repetition, by people who show up each day and keep systems functioning. When we ask which jobs in ancient Rome you would actually want, we are really asking, where in that enormous machine would you prefer to stand? You likely would not want to stand at the absolute bottom, where work depended entirely on physical endurance and where injury could mean immediate hardship. Nor would you necessarily want to stand at the very top, where political visibility carried constant risk. Rome's highest offices brought prestige, but also rivalry, scrutiny, and potential downfall. Instead, the most appealing position would probably lie somewhere in the stable middle, close enough to institutions to benefit from their protection, skilled enough to be valued, trusted enough to be retained, Think about the imperial secretary drafting correspondence. Each letter sent to a provincial governor, each instruction issued to a military commander, passed through careful hands. That secretary was not the emperor, yet he worked at the center of communication. His literacy and discretion were essential. In a world where written orders shaped policy, that role carried quiet authority. Or consider the experienced merchant who no longer traveled personally but oversaw shipments from a warehouse office. He understood supply routes, seasonal winds, market prices, and political climates. His wealth came not from spectacle, but from foresight. His life was built on calculation and long-term planning. Or the seasoned teacher of rhetoric whose former students now served in municipal councils and courts. His daily work remained the same: lessons, corrections, discussions, but his influence expanded through the achievements of others. Stability, once established, multiplied. These professions shared one final advantage. They aligned personal success with institutional continuity. As long as Rome's legal system functioned, lawyers were needed. As long as cities required water, engineers were needed. As long as trade flowed across the Mediterranean, merchants and accountants were needed. By attaching yourself to something enduring, you increased the likelihood that your own life would be steady. Of course, no role in the ancient world was completely secure. Epidemics, invasions, or political upheavals could disrupt even the most carefully structured careers. But relative security existed, and it mattered deeply. So if you imagine yourself walking through the streets of Rome, past the Forum, the baths, the warehouses along the Tiber, you might see countless forms of labor. The noise of construction, the heat of bakeries, the weight of cargo, and then, tucked slightly away from the dust and strain, you would find offices, classrooms, counting tables, drafting rooms. Inside those spaces worked the individuals who experienced Rome not as spectacle, but as system. And that, ultimately, is where you would want to be. Not at the center of applause, not at the edge of survival, but in the steady current of administration, education, trade, and skilled management. The quiet professions that made the Roman world function day after day, year after year. In ancient Rome, that was as close as one could come to a truly good job. And perhaps the most important perspective of all is this: the best jobs in ancient Rome were the ones that gave you options. Options to relocate if a city declined. Options to shift roles as you aged. Options to rely on reputation instead of raw strength. In a pre-modern world, optionality was rare. Most people were locked into cycles of seasonal labor, dependency, or physical exhaustion. But certain Roman professions created flexibility. A trained surveyor, for example, could work in Italy, Gaul, Hispania, or North Africa. Land had to be measured everywhere. Property lines had to be drawn. Veteran colonies required organized planning. That technical skill traveled across the empire's enormous geography. The same was true of literate administrators. A capable clerk fluent in Latin could serve in a provincial capital just as effectively as in Rome itself. In a connected imperial system, portability of skill was a profound advantage. Merchants possessed similar flexibility. If one trade route slowed, another might expand. Grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, textiles from the East. A diversified merchant did not depend entirely on a single local harvest. That diversification created resilience. Teachers and physicians also benefited from universal demand. Every generation needed education. Every community needed medical care. While income levels varied, the baseline demand remained steady. In economic terms, these were low-volatility professions compared to mining, construction, or speculative ventures. Another element worth considering is social insulation. Many of the desirable Roman jobs placed individuals in environments where civility and negotiation were part of daily routine. Courtrooms, classrooms, offices, and counting houses required measured interaction. They were structured spaces governed by rules and expectations. Contrast that with dockyards or quarries, where conflict, urgency, and physical strain were constant companions. Even within elite households, trusted managerial roles offered insulation. A steward managing estates or finances became indispensable through reliability. Over time, loyalty was often rewarded with improved living conditions or even eventual manumission in cases of formerly enslaved managers. While dependency was real, long-term trust created pathways to security that raw labor never could. It is also striking how many of these preferable professions revolved around information. Knowing market prices before others, understanding legal precedents, interpreting imperial edicts, maintaining accurate financial records. Information in Rome was slow-moving, but powerful. Those who controlled or interpreted it gained leverage. They were rarely the loudest figures in public life, yet their knowledge shaped decisions behind the scenes. And this brings us back to the central insight. Rome's strength was administrative. Its roads, aqueducts, laws, tax systems, and trade networks created cohesion across continents. The people who understood those systems and could operate within them were positioned for stability. So if you were choosing carefully, aware of Rome's inequalities but determined to maximize your chances, you would aim for literacy and skill. You would seek integration into institutions rather than isolation at their margins. You would value reputation above short-term gain. And you would understand that in an ancient empire, security was the highest form of wealth. The best jobs in ancient Rome were not defined by grandeur. They were defined by durability. They were found in ledgers and lesson plans, in boundary stones and architectural drafts, in contracts negotiated quietly and water channels maintained carefully. These were the professions that allowed individuals to live not extravagantly, but steadily. And in a world without modern safety nets, steady was extraordinary. Rome may be remembered for its emperors and legions, but its longevity belonged to its professionals, the administrators, teachers, engineers, merchants, and managers who kept the vast machine turning. And if you were there, looking for a life you'd actually want, that is where you would quietly place yourself. Before we close this journey entirely, there's one final layer worth exploring. What these best jobs tell us about Rome itself. Ancient Rome was not merely a military superpower. It was an administrative civilization. Conquest may have expanded its borders, but paperwork, planning, and predictable systems sustained them. That reality shaped which jobs were comfortable, respected, and resilient. If you look closely, nearly every desirable Roman profession we've discussed shares one deeper characteristic: alignment with order. Rome valued order in law, in property, in infrastructure, and in hierarchy. The professions that thrived were those that reinforced that order. Take the jurist interpreting legal codes, Roman law did more than settle disputes. It structured society. Clear inheritance rules stabilized families. Defined property rights reduced conflict. Contract enforcement enabled commerce. The jurist's role, therefore, was not just professional, it was civilizational. By clarifying how rules applied, he reinforced predictability. Predictability reduced chaos, and reduced chaos created opportunity. The same can be said of engineers responsible for roads and aqueducts. Roads did not simply connect cities. They integrated provinces into a single economic network. Aqueducts did not merely supply water. They made dense urban living sustainable. The professionals overseeing these systems were custodians of continuity. When infrastructure worked, daily life flowed smoothly. When it failed, unrest followed. Merchants and financiers also operated within this framework of order. Trade required trust. Trust required enforceable agreements. Enforceable agreements depended on courts and records. A banker or merchant who understood these layers could operate confidently within them. That confidence translated into calculated risk rather than blind gamble. In a volatile ancient economy, that distinction mattered immensely. Even education served order. Rhetoric and grammar were not abstract subjects. They prepared citizens to participate in civic life. A teacher shaped how arguments were formed, how laws were defended, how governance was articulated. Educated elites perpetuated Rome's administrative culture. And so the teacher, though modest in appearance, sustained the intellectual foundations of the state. Another revealing aspect of these professions is how they balanced ambition with restraint. Roman society admired achievement, but it also distrusted excessive display outside traditional hierarchies. Many of the most stable careers, administrator, surveyor, estate manager, allowed quiet advancement without provoking envy. They rewarded competence rather than spectacle. For someone seeking longevity rather than dramatic ascent, that balance would have been ideal. We should also remember that Rome's scale created redundancy. A failed harvest in one region could be offset by imports from another. A local official's death did not collapse the entire system. This redundancy strengthened institutional roles. If you were embedded in a structure larger than your immediate environment, you were less vulnerable to local shocks. Administrative and commercial professions benefited directly from this imperial scale. Of course, no ancient career offered guarantees. Political transitions could reshape priorities. Economic strain could tighten budgets. Epidemics could disrupt cities. But compared to lives dependent entirely on physical strength or daily wages, these structured professions provided buffers. They allowed individuals to navigate turbulence with tools rather than desperation. So when we imagine ourselves choosing a job in ancient Rome, not as an emperor, not as a general, but as an ordinary person with realistic constraints, the logical path becomes clear. We would invest in literacy if possible. We would cultivate reliability. We would seek connection to institutions whose lifespan exceeded our own. We would want to be part of the framework, not crushed beneath it. That might mean drafting contracts in a provincial office, supervising estate accounts, teaching rhetoric to ambitious young students, managing shipments in a bustling port, surveying land for veteran colonies. None of these roles promise luxury in a modern sense, but they promise continuity, and continuity in the ancient world was a profound privilege. Rome endured because it built systems that outlasted individuals. The people who operated within those systems, quietly, competently, consistently, lived lives far more stable than the dramatic stories of conquest might suggest. And in the end, if you truly wanted a life in ancient Rome that balanced safety, dignity, and opportunity, you wouldn't chase glory. You would choose structure. There is one final truth that quietly underlies this entire discussion. In ancient Rome, the best jobs were the ones that made you necessary, not temporarily useful, not easily replaced, necessary. Rome was vast, layered, and deeply dependent on coordination. Grain had to arrive on time. Taxes had to be recorded accurately. Water had to flow reliably. Contracts had to be enforceable. Armies had to be supplied. And behind each of those functions stood individuals whose expertise could not simply be improvised overnight. That is where true security lived. Consider once more the imperial accountant responsible for tracking provincial revenues. Rome's military campaigns, public games, infrastructure, and grain distributions all depended on financial clarity. A mistake in accounting could ripple outward into shortages or political embarrassment. Accuracy was not optional. Over time, a trusted financial officer became indispensable precisely because experience could not be rushed. The longer he served competently, the more valuable he became. The same logic applied to experienced engineers maintaining aqueduct systems. The gradient calculations, material tolerances, and repair techniques required deep familiarity. Water infrastructure was not something a novice could oversee casually. An engineer who understood the terrain, seasonal shifts, and weak points in the system possessed accumulated knowledge that protected entire communities. That accumulation of expertise translated directly into job durability. Even in the legal sphere, seasoned advocates built reputations not simply on eloquence but on consistency. Clients returned because outcomes were predictable. Judges listened because arguments were grounded in precedent. Over years, such professionals became fixtures in the civic landscape. Their presence symbolized reliability. Another compelling example lies in the management of large estates. Agricultural production in the Roman world was not simplistic. Crop rotation, storage preservation, labor coordination, and market timing required careful planning. A skilled estate manager who delivered steady yields year after year became invaluable to landowners. Replacing such a person carried risk. Reliability fostered trust. Trust fostered continuity. We should also acknowledge the importance of adaptability. The Roman Empire evolved over centuries, politically, economically, and administratively. Jobs tied to adaptable systems tended to survive these transitions. Merchants adjusted trade routes as political conditions shifted. Administrators adapted to new legal frameworks. Teachers adjusted curricula to reflect cultural changes. Flexibility layered on top of expertise created resilience. There is also a psychological dimension worth considering. Work grounded in organization and foresight provides a different experience than work grounded solely in reaction. A merchant forecasting next season's demand operates with intention. An administrator planning tax assessments works within structure. That forward-looking orientation offers a sense of control, even in uncertain times. Contrast that with purely reactive labor, responding to daily hiring needs, weather conditions, or fluctuating physical demand. The difference is not merely economic. It is experiential. Predictable work rhythms reduce stress. Established routines create mental stability. In a pre-modern world filled with unpredictability, that stability was rare and valuable. When modern viewers ask which Roman jobs they would actually want, they often instinctively gravitate toward positions that mirror contemporary professional ideals: educated, structured, and relatively secure. And that instinct aligns surprisingly well with historical reality. The Roman world rewarded literacy, calculation, planning, and trustworthiness because those traits sustained its systems. So if you imagine walking through a Roman city at dawn, listening as workshops open and carts begin to roll, you might consider where you would step. Toward the docks and their heavy lifting? Toward the fields and seasonal uncertainty? Or toward the counting house, the schoolroom, the surveyor's table, the administrative office? In the quiet spaces where ink met parchment, where numbers were tallied, where maps were drawn and contracts sealed, that is where durability lived. Rome's monuments still stand as stone reminders of its ambition. But the empire's daily survival depended on quieter professions. And if you were choosing a life within that world, not one of glory but one of measured stability, you would choose to be necessary to the system that kept Rome standing. That, more than anything else, was the closest ancient Rome came to offering a truly good job. And so, as we step back one last time, we begin to see that the idea of a good job in ancient Rome was not about comfort in the modern sense. It was about positioning yourself where Rome's momentum worked with you instead of against you. Rome was a civilization built on scale. The cities were crowded. The provinces were distant. Its politics could be unpredictable. But its systems, law, taxation, infrastructure, trade, education were designed to endure. If you placed yourself inside those systems, you were carried along by their stability. Think about how different that experience would have felt compared to life at the margins. A seasonal laborer depended on harvest cycles. A dock worker depended on ship arrivals. A construction laborer depended on ongoing projects. When demand paused, income paused. When illness struck, survival was uncertain. But an administrator in a municipal office? The city still needed records kept. A teacher of rhetoric? Students still required instruction. A merchant with established contracts? Goods still moved across the Mediterranean. An estate manager overseeing long-term agricultural production? The land still had to be organized and maintained. These roles were not immune to crisis, but they were anchored to continuity. And continuity in the ancient world was a form of wealth. There is also something deeply revealing about how Roman society viewed these professions. Inscriptions and funerary monuments frequently emphasized skill and service. Individuals were remembered as faithful stewards, respected teachers, trusted officials, successful merchants. These titles were not incidental. They reflected pride in competence. In a world without modern corporate titles or formal resumes, reputation was your lifelong credential. The most desirable Roman jobs allowed you to build that credential steadily. They rewarded memory and experience. They accumulated trust over time. They created relationships that could protect you in moments of vulnerability. And perhaps most importantly, they reduced exposure to the most punishing forms of labor. This does not mean they were effortless. Managing accounts required precision. Teaching demanded patience. Engineering required calculation. Legal advocacy required preparation and composure. These were demanding careers in their own way, but they demanded the mind more than the body, and that distinction profoundly shaped quality of life. When historians examine the Roman economy, they often focus on macro systems: grain supply chains, tax structures, imperial expenditures. But within those systems were individuals who translated policy into practice. They measured, recorded, instructed, negotiated, and supervised. Their lives were structured around routine rather than spectacle. And that routine is what made their work desirable. If you imagine yourself living in a Roman insula, waking at first light, stepping into the street, your day would feel very different depending on your occupation. Would you face unpredictable hiring, physical strain, exposure to harsh conditions? Or would you enter an office, a classroom, a counting room, spaces defined by order? The best Roman jobs offered entry into those ordered spaces. They allowed you to operate within Rome's grand machine without being crushed by it. They positioned you near information and decision-making, but not at the center of political rivalry. They gave you standing in your community without forcing you into constant competition for honor. They balanced ambition with sustainability. In the end, the most realistic answer to the question is surprisingly understated. You would not want to be emperor. You would not want to be a gladiator. You would not even necessarily want to be a senator. You would want to be skilled, trusted, embedded, an administrator whose accuracy was relied upon, an engineer whose calculations were respected, a teacher whose students advanced, a merchant whose contracts endured. Because in ancient Rome, as in many societies, the safest and most satisfying life was found not at the extremes, but in the stable center. And that quiet center, built on literacy, planning, and responsibility, is where the truly best Roman jobs were waiting. As we conclude this long reflection, it becomes clear that the idea of the best jobs in ancient Rome ultimately reveals something timeless about human societies. Across centuries, across cultures, and across radically different technologies, certain patterns repeat. The most desirable work is not usually the loudest or the most dramatic. It is the work that aligns personal skill with structural stability. Rome's greatness was not sustained by constant spectacle. It was sustained by repetition, by taxes collected accurately, by roads maintained methodically, by water delivered reliably, by contracts enforced consistently, and by lessons taught carefully. The people who performed those tasks lived in a different Rome from the one immortalized in epic poetry or marble statues. Their Rome was quieter. It unfolded in offices and courtyards, in schoolrooms and storehouses, in counting rooms and drafting tables. And that quieter Rome was the one most likely to offer you a life you would actually want. Imagine the difference in daily experience. A merchant reviewing ledgers in the shade of a warehouse. A teacher guiding a small group of students through lines of Virgil. An engineer inspecting the steady flow of an aqueduct outside the city walls. A municipal clerk updating property records after a peaceful hearing. These are not scenes of conquest or grandeur. They are scenes of maintenance. Maintenance may sound unremarkable, but in a civilization of Rome's size, maintenance was power. Those who maintained systems were necessary to them, and necessity created leverage, created protection, created continuity, We must also recognize that Rome, like any complex society, depended on trust. Financial trust, legal trust, social trust. A banker could not function without depositors' confidence. A legal advisor could not succeed without credibility. A steward could not remain employed without reliability. Trust accumulated slowly but paid long-term dividends. In an ancient world without digital records or centralized databases, personal reputation was everything. That is why so many of the best Roman jobs revolved around credibility. They rewarded consistency over flash, accuracy over aggression, reliability over raw ambition, and that alignment created something precious: predictability. Predictability meant planning was possible. It meant you could anticipate next month's income. It meant you could invest in education for a child. It meant you could cultivate relationships knowing they would endure beyond a single season. In contrast, those living on the margins often existed in a cycle of reaction. Their work depended on daily demand. Their security fluctuated with weather, supply, and circumstance. They had fewer buffers. So when we ask honestly and practically which Roman jobs we would actually want, the answer becomes grounded in realism. We would choose positions that offered buffers. We would want to be the person drafting the legal contract rather than disputing it, the one supervising the shipment rather than unloading it, the one calculating the grain distribution rather than waiting in line for it, the one teaching the next generation rather than scrambling for irregular wages. Not because these roles were luxurious, but because they were structured. Rome was a world without modern social safety nets. No unemployment insurance. No workplace protections. No universal health care. In that context, structure itself was protection. And so the best jobs in ancient Rome were the ones that placed you within that structure, firmly enough to benefit from it, but not so high as to be destroyed by its political storms. They were jobs of competence, jobs of integration, jobs of steady contribution, and in a civilization that lasted for centuries, steady contribution was the foundation of endurance. If you were there, walking the stone streets, hearing the hum of trade, watching officials move through the forum, you would quickly understand where stability lived. It lived in the hands of the people who kept the system running. And that, quietly and without spectacle, was where the best Roman jobs truly existed. If we allow ourselves one final layer of reflection, we begin to see that the best jobs in ancient Rome were not only about comfort or security, they were about rhythm. Life in the Roman world moved in cycles. Market days, legal hearings, religious festivals, tax assessments, shipping seasons, agricultural harvests. The professions that aligned themselves with these predictable rhythms tended to offer the most stable existence. A merchant did not operate randomly. He worked within sailing seasons and contract schedules. A teacher followed structured lessons and academic progression. A municipal official operated according to civic calendars and legal procedures. An estate manager organized planting and harvest by known seasonal patterns. When work followed rhythm, life followed rhythm. And rhythm reduced chaos. Contrast that with professions dependent on irregular demand. Casual laborers gathered each morning hoping to be selected for work. Dockworkers depended on ship arrivals that could be delayed by storms. Builders relied on project funding that could stall unexpectedly. The unpredictability of those rhythms translated directly into personal instability. The most desirable Roman jobs, therefore, were not only safer, they were cyclical in reassuring ways. There is also something deeply human about the appeal of structured contribution. When you maintain accounts that balance, when you teach lessons that build upon one another, when you manage estates that produce consistent yields, you witness continuity. Your effort feeds into a larger process. You are part of something that extends beyond the immediate moment. That psychological dimension should not be underestimated. In a vast empire, being part of the machinery that sustained order likely provided a sense of relevance and belonging. It is also important to recognize that Rome's professional classes were not isolated from the broader community. A respected physician became known across neighborhoods. A reliable merchant formed long-term partnerships. A skilled surveyor might mediate land disputes between families. These roles built social capital. And social capital in antiquity could be as valuable as money. Relationships mattered. Favors were exchanged. Patronage networks strengthened over time. Being embedded in such networks increased your resilience during hardship. If a crisis struck, fire, illness, temporary shortage, you were not alone. Many of the best Roman jobs naturally fostered these connections. Administrators interacted with local elites. Teachers worked with ambitious families. Merchants collaborated with suppliers and transporters. Engineers coordinated with civic authorities. Each interaction reinforced your place within the social web. And this brings us to a quiet but powerful conclusion. In ancient Rome, the best jobs were relational. They were not solitary. They were not disconnected from community. They operated at points of exchange, of goods, of information, of authority, of education. An exchange is where value accumulates. When we strip away the marble statues and battlefield imagery, we see that Rome's longevity rested on ordinary expertise applied consistently. Its greatness was bureaucratic as much as it was military. It was infrastructural as much as it was imperial. So if you were making a rational decision within that world, aware of its risks, its hierarchies, and its opportunities, you would aim for a profession that intersected with Rome's core systems. You would choose literacy over brute force, coordination over chaos, skill over spectacle. You would want to wake each morning knowing where you fit into the larger structure. And perhaps that is the most universal insight of all. Across time, across empires, the most desirable work has often been the kind that allows a person to participate in something stable, to be respected for competence, and to build security gradually rather than gamble on extremes. In ancient Rome, that meant becoming one of the quiet professionals who kept the machine running. Not the figure on the triumphal arch, not the name in the imperial decree, but the steady hand behind the scenes. And in a civilization built on order, that steady hand was the closest thing to a truly good job. As a final reflection, truly the last layer of this long exploration, it's worth considering how Rome itself would have viewed these professions. Roman culture admired discipline. It valued gravitas, steadiness, reliability. While military victory and political achievement were celebrated publicly, Roman moral writing often praised moderation and duty. The ideal citizen was not reckless or erratic, but consistent. In that sense, many of the best jobs we've discussed aligned perfectly with Roman ideals. A diligent administrator keeping accurate records embodied disciplina. A fair estate manager ensuring steady production demonstrated prudentia. A teacher shaping thoughtful students reflected cultural continuity. A merchant honoring contracts upheld fides, trust. These were not small virtues. They were the moral vocabulary of Rome itself. And so the most desirable professions were not only practical, they were culturally respected. Another element that makes these roles appealing is their relationship to time. Rome, unlike many earlier societies, operated on an expanding historical consciousness. Laws were preserved, precedents were cited, roads were built to last generations, aqueducts were engineered with longevity in mind. To work within such systems meant contributing to something durable. Imagine being an engineer who knows that the bridge you supervise may stand for decades, or a legal scholar whose interpretation may guide future judgments, or a teacher whose students will shape civic life long after your own career ends. That sense of extended impact would have been deeply meaningful. There is also a quieter economic reality at play. Rome's elite culture sometimes looked down on certain forms of direct trade, preferring land ownership as a marker of status. Yet in practice, commerce flourished. The professionals who navigated that tension carefully, building wealth without overtly challenging aristocratic norms, often achieved comfortable lives. This balance required subtlety, which again points toward intelligence and foresight as key advantages. And perhaps that is the final insight: foresight. The best Roman jobs rewarded people who could anticipate rather than react, who could calculate rather than gamble, who could preserve rather than merely expend effort. A surveyor anticipates disputes by measuring accurately. A merchant anticipates demand by studying markets. An administrator anticipates shortages by reviewing accounts. A teacher anticipates civic needs by cultivating articulate students. In each case, value is created by thinking ahead. Contrast that with purely reactive labor, responding to the immediate need of lifting, carrying, digging, or hauling. Necessary work, certainly, but less protected from volatility. So when we answer the original question, what were the best jobs in ancient Rome you'd actually want? The answer becomes clear not because of romance, but because of structure. You would want a job that required skill rather than brute force, placed you within a stable institution, allowed reputation to accumulate, offered predictable rhythm, connected you to networks of trust, and rewarded foresight over impulse. In Rome, those conditions were found in administration, education, engineering, commerce, finance, legal practice, and skilled estate management. Not glamorous roles, not legendary ones, but durable. And durability in the ancient world was everything. Rome's monuments may dominate our imagination, but its survival rested on quieter foundations. The professionals who maintained accounts, measured land, negotiated contracts, instructed youth, and supervised infrastructure were the steady pulse beneath the empire's grandeur. If you were there, aware of Rome's realities, seeking not glory but grounded security, you would choose to be part of that pulse. Because in ancient Rome, the closest thing to a truly good job was one that let you endure. As we truly bring this to a close, there is one final way to understand the best jobs in ancient Rome: by imagining what happened when things went wrong. Empires do not collapse overnight. They strain, harvests fail, prices fluctuate, political leadership changes, armies move, disease spreads, In moments like those, the difference between a tolerable life and a desperate one became painfully clear. If you were a day laborer depending on tomorrow's hiring, a disruption could be immediate and severe. If you relied on seasonal work, a failed harvest meant direct hardship. If your income depended entirely on physical strength, illness could erase it overnight. But if you were embedded in administration, trade, education, or infrastructure, the shock was often slower, softer, or buffered. An accountant still needed to reconcile accounts, even in difficult times. A municipal clerk still had records to maintain. A teacher might see fewer students, but instruction continued. A merchant might adjust routes rather than abandon trade entirely. These professions did not eliminate risk, nothing in the ancient world did, but they reduced exposure. That reduction is what makes them truly desirable. Another critical advantage of these roles was informational awareness. In Rome, news traveled through letters, messengers, traders, and official notices. Those working inside administrative or commercial systems heard developments earlier. They knew when taxes were changing, when shipments were delayed, when a governor was replaced, when a new law was enacted. Information allowed preparation. Preparation allowed adaptation. And adaptation meant survival. There is also something important about dignity. Roman society was hierarchical, but it respected competence. A trusted steward was valued. A skilled jurist was consulted. A reliable engineer was respected. Even if social mobility had limits, professional recognition still carried weight. Being known as capable mattered. In a culture that emphasized honor and reputation, your occupation shaped how others saw you. And how others saw you shaped opportunity. This is why literacy was so powerful. The ability to read and write was not universal. It created entry into a different layer of society, one defined by documentation and record rather than raw output. Contracts, wills, tax registers, shipping manifests, legal arguments, all of these required literacy. Literacy was leverage, and so many of the best Roman jobs depended on it. If you could calculate, record, measure, interpret, or instruct, you positioned yourself closer to the levers of continuity. You were part of Rome's memory system, its written structure of law and commerce. That position was far safer than standing at the edge of physical labor markets. It's also revealing that Rome invested heavily in infrastructure: roads, aqueducts, harbors, warehouses. Infrastructure creates maintenance needs. Maintenance creates stable work. And stable work creates communities of skilled professionals whose livelihoods are tied to long-term function. In that sense, Rome's ambition created opportunity. The larger the system grew, the more administrators, teachers, surveyors, engineers, and merchants it required. And those individuals lived lives shaped not by chaos, but by coordination. So if you imagine standing in ancient Rome, hearing the sounds of carts on stone, vendors calling, officials passing through the forum, and you ask yourself where stability lies, the answer is consistent. It lies in the offices behind the forum, in the classrooms off quiet courtyards, in the counting houses near the docks, in the estate villas overseeing production, in the drafting rooms measuring stone and water flow. It lies in competence applied daily. The best jobs in ancient Rome were not about grandeur. They were about integration. Integration into systems that outlasted individuals. integration into networks built on trust, integration into rhythms that repeated predictably. In a world without modern safeguards, integration was protection. And that is the clearest, most grounded answer to the question. If you truly wanted a life in ancient Rome that balanced safety, dignity, and endurance, you would not chase spectacle. You would choose to be part of the system that kept Rome running, quietly, reliably, continuously, because in the ancient world, continuity was the greatest privilege of all. And now, as we bring this long exploration to its natural conclusion, it helps to step back and see the broader historical pattern that Rome quietly reveals. Every complex civilization creates two kinds of work. The first kind builds spectacle. The second kind sustains structure. Spectacle is what history books often highlight: generals, senators, triumphs, monumental architecture. Structure is quieter. It lives in archives, in contracts, in ledgers, in classrooms, in surveying tools, in grain registries, in water channels that simply keep flowing. When we ask which jobs in ancient Rome you would actually want, we are really asking where in that balance you would choose to stand. If you stood too close to spectacle, you invited instability. Political life in Rome could be volatile. Alliances shifted. Favor rose and fell. Public visibility carried both prestige and risk. If you stood too far from structure, you faced exposure. Casual labor, heavy industry, and seasonal work offered little protection from illness, injury, or economic disruption. The most desirable position lay in between, close enough to structure to benefit from its continuity, far enough from spectacle to avoid its dangers. That middle ground is where we consistently find Rome's most stable professions. The administrator who understood procedures better than anyone else. The jurist whose interpretation clarified complex disputes. The engineer who knew the terrain intimately. The merchant whose network spanned multiple ports. The estate manager who could forecast yields and adjust labor efficiently. The teacher whose reputation grew as former students advanced. These were not glamorous roles, but they were indispensable. And indispensability was the closest thing Rome offered to long-term security. There is another dimension worth considering: the compounding effect of competence. In physically demanding roles, strength peaks and declines. In knowledge-based professions, experience compounds. A seasoned advocate becomes more persuasive. A veteran merchant becomes more strategic. An experienced administrator becomes more efficient. An older teacher becomes more respected. Time works with you, not against you. That reversal alone makes such professions deeply attractive in a pre-modern context. Even economically, these roles often allowed diversification. A merchant might invest in property. A teacher might tutor privately. An administrator might oversee multiple accounts. A successful artisan might employ apprentices. Multiple income streams reduced vulnerability. Again, we see the same theme: buffers. Roman society had no safety net in the modern sense, but it did have networks, patronage networks, commercial networks, educational networks, administrative networks. If your profession placed you within those webs, you gained indirect protection. It's also important to remember that Rome was urbanizing rapidly during much of its history. Cities create demand for organization. Crowded populations require water systems, waste management, housing oversight, market regulation, and legal enforcement. As urban density increased, so did the need for people who could manage complexity. Complexity creates opportunity for skilled professionals. And those professionals, if competent, could build relatively stable lives within that expanding structure. So if you truly imagine yourself living in ancient Rome, not as a mythical hero, but as an ordinary person with practical goals, the calculation becomes simple. You would seek literacy. You would cultivate reliability. You would align yourself with institutions that endure. You would avoid roles dependent purely on physical output. You would aim for steady contribution rather than dramatic ascent. In short, you would aim to become necessary to Rome's order. Because Rome's order was vast, layered, and persistent. And the people who maintained that order, quietly, methodically, without spectacle, lived lives far more stable than the dramatic narratives might suggest. The best jobs in ancient Rome were not those carved into triumphal arches. They were the ones performed day after day without interruption. In the end, that is the clearest answer history gives us. If you wanted a life in Rome that balanced dignity, safety, and opportunity, you would choose structure over spectacle. You would choose competence over glory. You would choose continuity over chaos. And in doing so, you would place yourself exactly where Rome itself placed its trust, in the steady hands that kept the empire functioning. That was the real privilege of a good job in ancient Rome. Not wealth alone, not fame, but endurance. If we take one last thoughtful walk through the streets of ancient Rome, past the Forum, along the Tiber, beneath the arches of aqueducts that still carried water day after day, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Rome did not run on excitement. It ran on reliability. Every morning, records had to be updated. Every week, markets had to be supplied. Every season, estates had to be managed. Every year, taxes had to be assessed. And behind each of those repeating obligations stood people whose work was neither theatrical nor temporary. It was continuous. That continuity is the key to understanding the best jobs in ancient Rome. A profession tied to continuity meant your livelihood was tied to something larger than short-term demand. If Rome itself endured, your work endured with it. Take the example of the Roman legal system once more. Laws were debated, yes, but they were also preserved, copied, studied, and interpreted. The machinery of law required scribes, archivists, legal assistants, advocates, and jurists. The legal world did not disappear after a single trial. It operated constantly. A skilled legal professional could build a life around that constancy. Or consider the tax infrastructure. Rome's provinces generated revenue year after year. Assessment, recording, collection, and distribution were ongoing processes. An individual embedded within that framework became part of an annual rhythm. That rhythm offered predictability, not perfection, but predictability. Infrastructure offers another powerful example. Roads cracked, bridges weakened, aqueduct channels accumulated mineral deposits. Maintenance was inevitable. That inevitability created stable technical roles. Engineers, inspectors, and supervisors were not needed occasionally. They were needed repeatedly. And repetition is security. When your job is part of a cycle, rather than a one-time event, you gain stability. Another subtle advantage of these professions lies in proximity to literacy and numeracy. In Rome, the ability to handle written documents was a gateway skill. Written contracts structured commerce. Written orders directed military movements. Written accounts tracked wealth. Written wills governed inheritance. To be literate was to participate in Rome's administrative bloodstream. And once you participated in that bloodstream, you were harder to replace. This is why so many of the most desirable Roman jobs required education, even if informal. Teachers of grammar and rhetoric produced future administrators. Administrators required clerks. Clerks required writing skill. Writing skill required instruction. The system reinforced itself. In contrast, brute labor required strength, and strength was widely available. Skill was not. That scarcity gave skilled professionals leverage. It also gave them dignity. Inscriptions from across the Roman world show individuals identifying proudly by their occupations: medicus, magister, negotiator, architectus. These were not titles of idle status. They were markers of earned competence. Competence translated into trust. Trust translated into opportunity. Opportunity translated into continuity. And continuity, once again, was everything. Even within the world of trade, often perceived as volatile, the most successful merchants were those who structured risk carefully. They diversified goods. They partnered across regions. They ensured shipments through shared investment models. They did not simply gamble, they calculated. Calculation is a form of control. The same applies to estate management. A well-run agricultural estate was not chaotic. It was scheduled. Planting followed seasonal calendars. Harvest followed ripening cycles. Storage followed preservation techniques. Sales followed market timing. The manager who understood these sequences operated within a predictable agricultural logic. Predictable systems create predictable income, and predictable income creates stability. If you imagine living in ancient Rome long enough to grow older, to raise a family, to plan for the future, that stability would matter more than short-term excitement. You would not want a profession dependent on youth alone. You would not want one that collapsed with a single injury. You would not want one that placed you at the mercy of shifting political favor. You would want something steady, something repeatable, something integrated. And that is the consistent conclusion history offers. The best jobs in ancient Rome were not those of spectacle or dramatic rise. They were roles of maintenance and management, roles where knowledge deepened over time, roles where reputation accumulated gradually, roles where you became woven into Rome's durable systems. The empire's grandeur was visible in marble and stone, but its true endurance lived in ink and measurement, in ledgers balanced correctly, in contracts drafted carefully, in water channels aligned precisely, in lessons taught patiently. If you wanted a life in ancient Rome that balanced dignity, safety, and long-term possibility, you would choose to stand in that quiet current of administration and skill. Because in a world defined by hierarchy and uncertainty, the greatest privilege was not glory. It was stability. And in Rome, stability belonged to those who kept the system running. If we slow the pace even further, and imagine living not just for a season but for decades within the Roman world, the meaning of a good job becomes even clearer. A good job in ancient Rome was one that aged well. This is something we rarely consider when picturing the past. But aging in a pre-modern society carried real vulnerability. Physical strength declined. Illness lingered. There were no pensions for most people, no guaranteed care beyond family and patronage networks. So the most desirable professions were those that allowed a person to grow older without becoming obsolete. A seasoned legal mind became more valuable with time. An experienced merchant refined his judgment with every contract. A veteran estate manager understood land and labor cycles instinctively. A respected teacher accumulated generations of former students in positions of influence. An administrator who had navigated multiple governors knew the system better than any newcomer. In each case, age enhanced authority. That enhancement is powerful. In contrast, a life built entirely on physical labor often worked in reverse. The older the body, the harder the task became. Injury risk increased. Income could shrink. The Roman world did not cushion that decline, but knowledge-based roles did. This alone makes professions rooted in literacy, calculation, coordination, and instruction profoundly attractive. There is also something subtle but important about environment. The best Roman jobs were usually performed indoors or within structured spaces: offices, villas, classrooms, courts, warehouses. These were controlled environments compared to fields, quarries, or open construction sites. Shelter from weather, reduced exposure to hazard, a degree of personal dignity. Environment shapes daily life. To work in a space defined by order rather than exhaustion is not trivial. It influences health, mood, and longevity. And when we examine inscriptions, contracts, and surviving records from across the Roman Empire, we repeatedly encounter evidence of thriving professional classes. Merchants in port cities, legal experts in provincial capitals, educators in urban centers, surveyors in newly organized colonies, administrators overseeing tax districts. Rome's expansion created demand for expertise everywhere it reached. That demand created opportunity. It is important to emphasize that these opportunities were not evenly distributed. Access to literacy, patronage, or initial capital mattered. But within those constraints, skill could amplify advantage. Reliability could convert patronage into permanence. And permanence was the ultimate prize. The Roman state itself prized continuity. Laws built upon earlier laws. Infrastructure layered upon previous designs. Offices evolved but rarely disappeared. In such a system, careers connected to administration and coordination could persist across generations. And that generational dimension matters deeply. A merchant might pass trade connections to his son. A teacher might educate his own children into civic life. An administrator might position his family within a stable municipal framework. A successful artisan might build a workshop that endured beyond his lifetime. A good job in Rome was one that created legacy. Not necessarily aristocratic fame, but continuity of livelihood. When we consider the broader historical arc, the Republic transforming into the Empire, provinces integrating into a unified administrative structure, it becomes even clearer that Rome rewarded those who understood systems, those who could navigate taxation procedures, those who could interpret evolving legal codes, those who could manage increasingly complex trade networks, those who could maintain expanding urban infrastructures. Complexity creates opportunity for specialists, and specialists who operated within durable institutions experienced a kind of ancient professional stability that many manual laborers never could. So when the question is asked one final time, which jobs in ancient Rome would you actually want? The answer is not poetic. You would want to be part of the machine, not beneath it. You would want to manage, measure, record, instruct, negotiate, supervise, interpret. You would want your value to increase with time. You would want to be trusted, because in Rome, trust was currency. And the most valuable currency of all was not gold. It was reliability within a system that endured. The empire's marble monuments may define its image, but its real foundation lay in those who maintained continuity. And if you were choosing carefully, not chasing glory, but seeking durability, you would quietly align yourself with that foundation. That was the closest thing ancient Rome offered to a truly good job. Not brilliance, not fame, but endurance within order. And in a world without modern protections, endurance was everything. And if we let this reflection settle completely, one final image helps tie everything together. Imagine Rome not at its most dramatic moment, but at its most ordinary. It is not a triumphal procession day. It is not a Senate crisis. It is not the dedication of a grand temple. It is simply a regular morning. Vendors prepare their stalls. Clerks open their tablets. Teachers review passages for the day's lesson. Messengers arrive with sealed correspondence. Warehouse managers check inventories. Surveyors mark boundary stones in a provincial field. Accountants total figures from the previous week. Nothing spectacular, and yet everything essential. The people performing these tasks were not the figures' history immortalized in statues, but they were the ones ensuring that the statues remained standing, metaphorically and literally. The Roman world was vast, but it was not chaotic by accident. It functioned because countless professionals translated imperial ambition into daily procedure. And daily procedure is where stability lives. If you were choosing a job within that world, not as a legend, but as a human being concerned with food, shelter, family, and future, your decision would likely revolve around minimizing uncertainty. Uncertainty in income, uncertainty in physical safety, uncertainty in social standing. The best Roman jobs reduced those uncertainties. An experienced municipal official did not wonder each day whether he would be needed. The city required governance continuously. A merchant with established contracts did not rely on luck alone. He relied on relationships built over years. A respected physician did not advertise wildly for new clients. Reputation carried his name forward. A teacher did not depend on random opportunity. Education was woven into elite ambition. An engineer did not hope infrastructure would vanish. Maintenance was inevitable. These professions shared something critical: inevitability of demand. Demand that did not disappear with weather, fashion, or rumor. In economic terms, they were embedded in structural necessity. And structural necessity is the safest place to build a life. Another subtle but meaningful advantage of such roles was psychological stability. When work follows procedures and expectations, anxiety decreases. Routine creates familiarity. Familiarity creates confidence. In a pre-modern society where disease, fire, and political rumor could disrupt life quickly, that psychological steadiness mattered. You could wake knowing what the day required. That clarity is not trivial. It is the difference between reacting to chaos and participating in order. Even socially, these professions allowed measured respect. A competent administrator earned quiet esteem. A capable estate manager earned trust. A diligent teacher earned gratitude. These were forms of recognition that did not provoke envy the way ostentatious power sometimes did. Rome admired hierarchy, but it also respected competence within that hierarchy. And that respect reinforced durability. Over decades, the Roman Empire expanded, stabilized, and adapted. The people who prospered most consistently were those who adapted with it, aligning themselves not with fleeting political tides, but with systems that outlasted individual leaders. Law outlasted consuls. Infrastructure outlasted governors. Trade networks outlasted market fluctuations. Education outlasted generational change. So when we ask one final time which jobs in ancient Rome you would actually want, the answer is steady and consistent. You would want to be embedded in permanence, not at the peak of spectacle, not at the bottom of strain, but within the durable middle where literacy, calculation, supervision, and instruction formed the backbone of daily life. Rome's empire may have been built by conquest, but it was sustained by administration. And the most desirable Roman jobs were those that placed you inside that sustaining current, where your skill compounded, your reputation strengthened, and your future felt more predictable than precarious. In the ancient world, that was the closest thing to comfort. And comfort, in a civilization as immense and unequal as Rome, was never accidental. It was earned through alignment with order. That was the true secret behind the best jobs in ancient Rome. Not glory, not extravagance, but steady belonging to a system that kept moving forward, day after day, year after year, century after century. If we allow ourselves one last, careful conclusion, we begin to see that the real measure of a good job in ancient Rome was not excitement, wealth alone, or even prestige in isolation. It was insulation. Insulation from physical danger. Insulation from sudden economic collapse. Insulation from political volatility. Insulation from aging without support. And the professions that provided that insulation were remarkably consistent across centuries of Roman history. They were the roles tied to coordination rather than exertion. The imperial courier administrator who organized dispatch routes did not sail in storms, but he ensured communication flowed. The warehouse supervisor did not carry sacks of grain, but he controlled distribution records. The provincial legal assistant did not write laws, but he ensured they were applied correctly. The accountant did not mint coins, but he determined how they were allocated. Each role existed at a point of control within a larger process. Control, even partial control, reduces vulnerability. That principle transcends time. Even Rome's most powerful emperors depended on administrators to translate policy into action. Without clerks, record keepers, engineers, and supply managers, imperial ambition would have collapsed into disorder. The professionals who maintained those layers were not ornamental. They were structural. And structure creates predictability. Predictability creates planning. Planning creates stability. This chain reaction explains why the most desirable Roman jobs were rarely the most dramatic. Another factor worth emphasizing is visibility without exposure. A respected teacher was visible enough to be known, but not so visible as to become a political target. A merchant was influential in commercial circles, but not typically at the center of Senate intrigue. An estate manager wielded authority locally, but not publicly in Rome's volatile political arena. These middle positions allowed social recognition without existential risk. And in a society where public life could turn swiftly against prominent figures, that middle ground was often the safest. There is also something profoundly practical about how these jobs aligned with Rome's material reality. The empire's survival depended on three recurring pillars: food supply, infrastructure, and law. Food required management. Infrastructure required oversight. Law required interpretation. If your profession intersected with one of those pillars, your work was not temporary. It was ongoing. Even as leadership changed, these pillars remained. That is why estate managers, engineers, surveyors, teachers, administrators, legal professionals, merchants, and financiers consistently occupied Rome's more stable tiers of society. They were not immune to hardship, no one was, but they were buffered. And buffers were priceless. Imagine aging into your 50s or 60s in the Roman world. Physical labor would become increasingly difficult. But a seasoned administrator or merchant could continue relying on judgment rather than muscle. A respected jurist could offer consultation even after stepping back from daily litigation. A teacher could reduce workload but retain students. The work adapted to the body, not the other way around. That flexibility is one of the clearest markers of a good job in any era. Finally, there is something almost philosophical about this conclusion. Rome celebrated power, but it depended on process. It honored conquest, but it survived through coordination. And the people who benefited most from its endurance were not those chasing spectacle, but those mastering systems. If you were transported back into that world and forced to choose wisely, you would likely pursue literacy, cultivate reliability, and attach yourself to institutions with long horizons. You would avoid roles that burned bright and briefly. You would seek those that glowed steadily. Because in ancient Rome, steady was strength. Steady was protection. Steady was survival. The best jobs were not the ones that made you famous. They were the ones that made you necessary, quietly, continuously, and reliably. And in an empire that measured its life in centuries, necessity was the truest form of security. That is where you would want to stand, not in the spotlight, but in the structure that kept the spotlight standing. And if we let the dust finally settle on this question, we arrive at something surprisingly simple. The best jobs in ancient Rome were the ones that let you live an ordinary life without constant fear. Not fear of sudden poverty. Not fear of bodily breakdown from relentless labor. Not fear of political collapse sweeping you away. Rome was not gentle. It was not modern. It was not protective in the way contemporary societies attempt to be. But within its vast machinery, there were positions that allowed a person to breathe a little easier. And those positions all shared one trait. They placed you inside Rome's systems rather than at their mercy. Inside the tax system as a recorder rather than outside it as someone struggling to pay. Inside the grain distribution network as an administrator rather than outside it in the breadline. Inside the legal structure as an interpreter rather than outside it as someone unable to navigate its complexities. Inside the estate economy as a manager rather than outside it as seasonal labor. Being inside meant having information. It meant having relationships. It meant having continuity. The Roman world was hierarchical, but it was also procedural. Procedures governed contracts, inheritance, taxation, land boundaries, and civic duty. If your profession revolved around those procedures, you operated within predictability. Predictability reduces chaos, and chaos was the true enemy of stability in antiquity. There is also something deeply revealing about how Rome treated expertise. While aristocratic lineage mattered, expertise was still sought after. A wealthy landowner needed a competent manager. A governor needed skilled clerks. A merchant needed accurate accounts. A legal dispute required informed interpretation. Competence had market value. And market value, even in a rigid society, created leverage. If you were competent and trustworthy, you could secure patronage. Patronage could translate into steady work. Steady work could translate into property, reputation, and security. That progression, skill to trust, trust to stability, is the quiet pathway that defined Rome's most desirable careers. Even geographically, Rome's expansion multiplied opportunities for such professionals. Provincial cities required administrators. Newly organized lands required surveyors. Expanding trade routes required merchants and financiers. Urban growth required engineers and overseers. Complexity breeds demand for skill, and skill breeds resilience. When modern viewers imagine ancient Rome, they often picture extremes: emperors and gladiators, opulence and brutality. But most Romans lived somewhere between those extremes. And within that middle ground, the best possible outcome was not wealth beyond measure. It was sustainable order, a routine that repeated, an income that arrived, a reputation that strengthened, a body not destroyed by 40, a name known for reliability. That was success. If you walked through Rome at midday, past the forum's legal debates, past the bustling shops, past the orderly rows of warehouses, you would see evidence of thousands of quiet professions operating simultaneously. Each contract drafted, each account tallied, each boundary measured, each lesson delivered, each shipment recorded. None dramatic on its own, yet together they sustained an empire. And the individuals performing those tasks experienced a Rome defined not by spectacle, but by rhythm. That rhythm, structured, repeatable, dependable, is what made certain jobs genuinely desirable. So in the end, if you were there, making the most rational choice available within the constraints of the ancient world, you would not chase glory. You would choose stability. You would choose literacy. You would choose responsibility over risk. You would choose to become part of Rome's durable framework, where experience accumulated rather than faded, where trust protected rather than exposed, and where your life moved in step with systems designed to endure. Because in ancient Rome, the closest thing to a truly good job was not power. It was belonging to order. And in a civilization that lasted centuries, belonging to order was the safest place to stand. If we sit with this question just a little longer, one final truth begins to feel almost universal. The best jobs in ancient Rome were the ones that allowed you to sleep well at night. Not because life was easy, not because Rome was peaceful, but because your role in society was clear, stable, and needed. Clarity matters more than spectacle. A municipal clerk knew what tomorrow required: documents to update, disputes to record, accounts to reconcile. A teacher knew the progression of lessons ahead: grammar today, rhetoric tomorrow. A merchant knew shipments to expect and contracts to fulfill. An estate manager knew planting cycles, storage capacities, labor rotations. This clarity created mental steadiness. In a world where disease could strike suddenly and politics could shift quickly, mental steadiness was a quiet privilege. It is easy to underestimate how valuable that would have been in antiquity. The Roman Empire was vast, but it was not immune to disruption. Grain shortages caused anxiety. Political rumors spread through cities rapidly. Local unrest could flare. In those moments, people on the margins felt the pressure first and most severely. But those embedded in structured professions often had information earlier. They had relationships to rely upon. They had routines to continue. Routine itself can be protective. And this is perhaps the most overlooked feature of desirable Roman work. It reinforced routine rather than chaos. Rome's administrators followed procedural calendars. Its legal professionals operated within established frameworks. Its teachers followed structured curricula. Its engineers adhered to measured calculations and technical guidelines. These roles functioned within rule-bound environments. Rules create boundaries. Boundaries create predictability. Predictability creates stability. And stability is the foundation of a good life in any era. There is also a social dimension worth appreciating. Many of the best Roman jobs placed individuals in positions of mediation rather than conflict. A surveyor mediated land disputes. A legal advisor mediated inheritance claims. A merchant negotiated between buyer and seller. An administrator mediated between citizen and state. Mediators are valuable in hierarchical societies. They reduce friction. They translate complexity. They facilitate cooperation. Facilitation is less dangerous than confrontation. It is less physically exhausting than manual labor. And it is less politically volatile than high office. That middle ground, facilitator rather than fighter, consistently emerges as the safest professional identity in Rome. Another revealing point is how these roles allowed for incremental progress. A merchant's network could expand slowly. A teacher's reputation could build cohort by cohort. An administrator's authority could deepen with experience. An engineer's projects could accumulate over years. Progress did not require sudden transformation. It required consistency. Consistency compounds. And compounding effort is far more sustainable than dramatic ascent. When historians examine long-lived empires, they often find that the most stable classes are those whose work reinforces institutional continuity. Rome is no exception. Its professional administrators, merchants, teachers, and technical experts formed the connective tissue of the empire. Without them, expansion would have collapsed into disorder. With them, the empire functioned for centuries. So if you imagine yourself walking through Rome, not as a spectator of its grand monuments, but as a resident seeking the best possible life within its constraints, your choice would likely be grounded, not glamorous. You would seek to become indispensable through skill. You would seek to embed yourself within durable institutions. You would seek predictable rhythms over dramatic swings. You would seek reputation over spectacle, because spectacle fades, but structure endures. And in ancient Rome, endurance was the ultimate measure of success. The best jobs were not carved into marble. They were written in ink, measured in stone, counted in ledgers, and repeated in classrooms. They were quiet professions that sustained daily life. And in a civilization as immense and demanding as Rome, sustaining daily life was the most important work of all. that is where you would want to stand, not in the glare of triumph, but in the steady current of continuity, where your effort aligned with Rome's lasting order, and where your life, though ordinary, was secure within something vast and enduring. In the end, that was the true privilege of a good job in ancient Rome. And if we imagine, finally, that we have lived an entire lifetime in ancient Rome, the meaning of all this becomes deeply personal. You wake in the same city for decades. You see emperors change. You hear news from distant provinces. You watch markets fluctuate, buildings rise, officials come and go. Through it all, your work continues. If you chose well, if you positioned yourself inside Rome's durable systems, your daily life would not be defined by spectacle. It would be defined by continuity. You would know where to go each morning. You would know who relied on you. You would know what skills set you apart. That sense of belonging to a functioning structure would shape your identity. A Roman teacher did not simply earn fees. He participated in shaping civic culture. A merchant did not merely sell goods. He linked regions of the empire together. An administrator did not just file records. He sustained governance. An engineer did not only measure gradients. He preserved public health and infrastructure. These roles offered purpose grounded in practicality. And purpose grounded in practicality is durable. There is also something quietly powerful about being part of something larger than yourself. Rome was immense. To be connected to its legal system, its trade routes, its urban planning, or its educational traditions meant your life intersected with history's flow. Even if your name was never recorded in monumental inscriptions, your work mattered in the ongoing functioning of the empire. That kind of significance is understated, but real. Contrast that with lives spent on the edges, dependent on chance, exposed to volatility, disconnected from the core mechanisms of order. The difference would have been felt not in dramatic moments, but in daily confidence. Confidence that tomorrow's work would still exist. Confidence that your expertise would still be valued. Confidence that your relationships would provide support in difficulty. Confidence that aging would not strip you of usefulness. These quiet assurances define a good life in almost any time period. Rome, despite its grandeur, was built on fragility. Grain ships could be delayed. Political tensions could rise. Epidemics could spread. Fire could devastate entire districts. But those embedded in administration, trade coordination, estate management, legal systems, and technical infrastructure often faced those crises with tools rather than helplessness. They had information. They had networks. They had experience. And experience over time becomes its own shield. So when we answer the question, which jobs in ancient Rome would you actually want? The final answer is not romantic. You would not want constant danger. You would not want unpredictable wages. You would not want political exposure. You would want steadiness. You would want to be necessary in ways that are sustainable. You would want to align your life with Rome's systems of order rather than its moments of chaos. The best jobs were those that placed you at points of coordination, where goods, information, law, or instruction passed through your hands. They were not the highest offices. They were not the loudest careers. They were the professions that allowed your life to move in rhythm with an empire that prized organization. And that rhythm, steady, structured, repeating, was the closest thing Rome offered to comfort. In the end, Rome's greatness did not depend solely on emperors or generals. It depended on the professionals who translated ambition into administration and power into procedure. If you wanted a life in ancient Rome that balanced dignity, safety, and long-term possibility, you would choose to become one of those professionals. Not chasing glory, but cultivating continuity, because in a civilization that endured for centuries, continuity was the most valuable possession of all. And that is where the truly best Roman jobs were found, in the quiet, steady work that kept the empire standing long after the applause had faded. If we allow ourselves one final, steady breath inside this world, we begin to understand something essential about ancient Rome. Survival favored those who aligned themselves with permanence. Rome was built to last. Its roads were layered for durability. Its aqueducts were engineered with precision. Its laws were codified and preserved. Its tax systems were standardized. Its bureaucracy expanded over time rather than shrinking. This was not a civilization built on improvisation alone. It was built on repetition and record. And so the best jobs in ancient Rome were those that participated in that permanence. A records clerk working in a provincial capital might not have held a prestigious title, but he interacted daily with documents that defined property rights and civic obligations. His work entered archives. Archives endured. An engineer overseeing repairs to a bridge contributed to infrastructure that would outlive him. That bridge carried trade and troops long after his career ended. A teacher instructing students in rhetoric and law shaped minds that would administer cities decades later. A merchant maintaining supply contracts strengthened trade routes that connected continents. Each of these roles tied individual effort to institutional longevity. And institutional longevity offered personal protection. Because if your livelihood was embedded in something designed to persist, you were less vulnerable to temporary disruption. There is a practical wisdom in that. Even in times of political instability, when emperors changed quickly or factions competed, the administrative apparatus continued. Taxes were still collected. Grain was still distributed. Water still flowed. Roads still required upkeep. The professionals who maintained those systems were not immune to change, but they were less exposed to sudden collapse. That exposure difference is crucial. It is the difference between reacting to crisis and managing within it. Another overlooked element is the importance of documentation in Rome. Written contracts, wills, census records, military rosters, and trade accounts created continuity beyond memory. To work in a profession centered on documentation was to work at the foundation of Roman stability. Literacy was not simply a skill, it was a gateway to structural relevance. And structural relevance created durability. The more complex Rome became, the more it relied on individuals who could navigate complexity. Surveyors ensured land boundaries were precise. Accountants balanced revenue against expenditure. Legal scholars interpreted evolving statutes. Urban planners coordinated expansion. Shipping coordinators synchronized arrivals and storage. Each role represented a point where chaos could have entered but did not, because someone competent stood there. Competence reduces risk. Reduced risk improves life quality. Life quality in a pre-modern empire was often measured in security rather than luxury. It is also telling that many of these desirable professions encouraged moderation rather than extremity. They did not require flamboyance. They required steadiness. Rome admired gravitas, seriousness, responsibility, weight of character. A steady administrator embodied that. A disciplined estate manager embodied that. A measured jurist embodied that. These were not dramatic figures, but they were culturally respected. And cultural respect reinforced stability. Over time, those who mastered Rome's systems could even shape them. Experienced officials influenced procedural norms. Successful merchants influenced trade practices. Legal scholars influenced interpretation. Their careers evolved from participation to refinement. That evolution is the hallmark of a good profession. If you imagine living 50 years in Rome, watching seasons pass and regimes change, what you would value most is not sudden fortune. You would value continuity, the ability to rely on your expertise, the ability to maintain relationships built over decades, the ability to adapt without starting over entirely. That is what the best Roman jobs provided. Not immunity from hardship, but insulation. Not glamour, but grounding. Not spectacle, but structure. In the end, Rome's empire may have been remembered for conquest and marble, but it endured through paperwork and procedure. And if you wanted a life in ancient Rome that was realistically sustainable, one that allowed you to build, age, and leave something behind, you would choose to stand within that procedural current. You would become one of the quiet professionals who kept the empire functioning. Because in a world defined by hierarchy and uncertainty, the greatest privilege was not fame. It was being necessary to something that lasted. That was the truest version of a good job in ancient Rome. And that is where, thoughtfully and practically, you would want to place yourself. If we let the question settle completely, not just as a list of professions but as a lived reality, we begin to see that the best jobs in ancient Rome were the ones that allowed you to build a life that felt coherent from beginning to end. Rome was not a society of sudden reinvention. Most people did not switch careers repeatedly. Your work often shaped your identity permanently. So choosing well, if you had the option, mattered enormously. A coherent life in Rome meant that your early training led naturally into adulthood. That adulthood built toward mature authority. And that maturity transitioned into respected elder status rather than decline into irrelevance. This arc was possible in professions tied to knowledge and administration. A young man trained in rhetoric could begin assisting in legal preparation. Over time, he could advocate cases. In later years, he might advise others or write legal commentary. His authority deepened with age. A merchant's apprentice could learn accounts and logistics. In adulthood, he could manage contracts. In maturity, he might invest, supervise partners, or fund civic works. His experience became capital. A surveyor could begin under supervision, mastering measurement tools and geometric principles. Later, he would oversee projects independently. Eventually, he might train others. His knowledge would compound rather than diminish. This continuity across life stages is one of the clearest markers of a good job in the Roman world. In contrast, professions built purely on physical output did not always offer such progression. Strength peaks and fades. Injury interrupts. Replacement is easy. The long-term arc is fragile. Rome's administrative expansion, especially under the Empire, created increasing layers of professional opportunity. As provinces multiplied, so did the need for officials, clerks, financial officers, and technical specialists. Governance at scale requires hierarchy, and hierarchy creates career ladders. Career ladders mean advancement without chaos. You did not need to overthrow anyone to rise. You needed competence and reliability. That is a profoundly stabilizing mechanism in any society. Another factor that made certain Roman jobs desirable was the nature of compensation. Skilled professionals were often paid in ways that allowed accumulation, fees, commissions, land grants, retainers, gifts from patrons. Accumulation meant savings. Savings meant independence. Independence, even partial independence, meant insulation from daily survival anxiety. And survival anxiety was common in the ancient world. Even the rhythm of the Roman calendar reinforced this sense of structure. Legal sessions followed set periods. Markets operated on recurring days. Religious festivals punctuated the year. Tax assessments were cyclical. Agricultural planning followed seasonal logic. The best jobs fit into these rhythms rather than fighting them. Teachers prepared students year by year. Administrators reviewed accounts on schedule. Merchants planned shipments according to predictable sailing seasons. Estate managers rotated crops in known cycles. This alignment with predictable patterns created mental order. And mental order fosters confidence. There is also a deeper social truth. Rome respected those who understood systems. The jurist who could cite precedent, the engineer who calculated gradients correctly, the administrator who avoided costly mistakes. These individuals were valued precisely because complexity was increasing. Complexity rewards specialization. Specialization rewards training. Training rewards foresight. And foresight is the most protective trait in uncertain times. Even during periods of imperial turbulence, when leadership changed rapidly, the bureaucratic apparatus rarely vanished. Emperors depended on it. Military commanders relied on supply officers. Provincial governors required clerical infrastructure. Systems persisted because they were necessary. And those embedded within necessary systems had a form of quiet resilience. It is telling that some of the wealthiest non-aristocratic Romans were freedmen who mastered administration and trade. Their status origins may have been limited, but their skills positioned them within the empire's arteries. By understanding logistics, finance, and coordination, they secured influence beyond their starting point. That mobility, while not universal, proves the pattern. Rome rewarded structural competence. So if you imagine living there, waking each morning to the sounds of carts and vendors, seeing senators pass through the forum, hearing news from distant provinces, and you ask yourself where you would want to stand, the answer becomes grounded and realistic. You would not aim for dramatic rise and fall. You would not seek roles that consumed youth and discarded age. You would not rely on unpredictable demand. You would seek a profession that allowed growth, stability, and gradual accumulation of respect. You would want your skill to deepen. You would want your relationships to strengthen. You would want your experience to matter more each year. In other words, you would choose durability, because Rome itself was durable. Its systems were built to repeat, and the best jobs were those woven into that repetition, steady, structured, and resistant to sudden collapse. In a world without modern protections, that was the ultimate advantage. Not fame, not extravagance, but a life that held together from youth to old age within the framework of something designed to endure. That was the real secret behind the best jobs in ancient Rome. They allowed you to live not at the mercy of the empire's scale, but safely inside its order. And in the ancient world, living inside order was the greatest privilege of all. If we linger just a little longer inside this question, one more dimension reveals itself: the relationship between risk and return in the Roman world. Every society distributes risk unevenly. In ancient Rome, risk could come in many forms: physical danger, financial instability, political entanglement, social vulnerability, or simple unpredictability. The most desirable jobs were those that offered a reasonable return while minimizing exposure to catastrophic risk. A merchant who diversified goods across several regions reduced dependence on a single harvest. An estate manager who maintained reserves could buffer poor seasons. An administrator who mastered procedures became harder to dismiss without consequence. A legal expert who built a reputation for fairness attracted steady clients rather than volatile, one-time disputes. These were calculated positions, not reckless ones. Rome's economy was vibrant but fragile in places. Shipping relied on weather. Agriculture relied on rainfall. Politics relied on personalities. The people who fared best over time were those who insulated themselves from reliance on a single variable. And insulation came from embedding oneself in recurring systems. Another powerful advantage of the most desirable Roman professions was proximity to decision-making without being the ultimate decision-maker. The emperor carried immense power and immense danger. Senators lived in public competition. Military commanders faced battlefield uncertainty. But the professionals advising, recording, calculating, and coordinating beneath them often experienced far more consistent lives. A provincial financial officer might influence how revenue was allocated, yet remain largely invisible to political rivals. A legal scholar might shape interpretation of statutes without standing for election. A logistics officer in the army ensured supply lines functioned without leading charges in combat. This proximity without exposure was a form of strategic positioning. It offered influence without inviting the full weight of scrutiny. There is also something telling about how Rome institutionalized trust. Contracts were written, agreements were witnessed, oaths were formalized. Professional reliability became documented over time. In such a culture, consistency was remembered. If you handled accounts accurately year after year, people knew. If you settled disputes fairly, word spread. If you delivered shipments reliably, partnerships strengthened. Reputation became cumulative capital. And cumulative capital compounds quietly but powerfully. This compounding effect made knowledge-based professions especially appealing. They allowed individuals to move from competence to authority, authority to mentorship, mentorship to legacy. Legacy is perhaps the final piece of this puzzle. Many Roman inscriptions emphasize profession alongside family. A man might be remembered not just as a father or citizen, but as a medicus, negotiator, magister, architectus. Occupation was identity. To be remembered for a skill meant that skill shaped your life meaningfully. A good job in Rome was not merely an income stream. It was a stable identity that endured across decades. Even in times of imperial strain, economic contraction, frontier pressure, leadership transition, the machinery of governance and trade did not simply dissolve. It adjusted, and those embedded within it adjusted with it. Adjustment is easier when you are trained to think structurally. Engineers adapt designs. Merchants adjust routes. Administrators revise procedures. Teachers adapt instruction. Flexibility within structure creates resilience. In contrast, roles tied exclusively to physical strength or seasonal availability offered little room to pivot. When strength declined, options narrowed. When seasons failed, income vanished. The best Roman jobs, therefore, were those that gave you room to maneuver, room to adapt, room to reposition, room to age. And perhaps that is the clearest expression of desirability in the ancient world, room to continue. If you imagine living through multiple emperors, witnessing policy shifts, observing urban expansion and occasional contraction, what you would value most is not speed of ascent. You would value steadiness of footing. You would want a profession that allowed you to remain relevant as Rome evolved. And the professions most likely to provide that relevance were those grounded in literacy, coordination, measurement, negotiation, and instruction. They were professions that thrived on complexity rather than collapsing under it. Rome grew more complex over time, and complexity rewards those who understand systems. So in the final accounting, the best jobs in ancient Rome were not defined by grandeur. They were defined by balance. Balanced exposure to risk. Balanced accumulation of authority. Balanced rhythm of work. Balanced relationship to power. Not too visible. Not too vulnerable. But firmly anchored in the machinery that kept the empire functioning. And in a civilization that endured for centuries, anchoring yourself to that machinery was the most rational choice available. Because Rome rewarded not only ambition, but alignment. And alignment with durable systems was the surest path to a life that held together, quietly, steadily, and securely, within one of history's greatest empires. If we take one final, measured look at this world, there is something almost philosophical about the kinds of work that proved most desirable in ancient Rome. Rome was a civilization obsessed with order, legal order, architectural order, military order, civic order. It believed in structure. It believed in hierarchy. It believed in continuity. And so the jobs that offered the best lives were the ones that harmonized with those beliefs. They did not resist the system. They did not depend on spectacle. They did not gamble on chaos. They worked with the grain of Roman society. An administrator aligned himself with bureaucracy. A jurist aligned himself with codified law. An engineer aligned himself with mathematical precision. A merchant aligned himself with structured trade networks. A teacher aligned himself with cultural continuity. Each of these roles reinforced the very mechanisms that made Rome durable. And in doing so, they allowed the individual to become part of something that outlasted any single crisis. There is also an emotional dimension here that is easy to overlook. Living in a pre-modern world meant living with vulnerability. Epidemics, fires, food shortages, political upheaval. These were not rare. They were expected possibilities. The most desirable professions offered not immunity, but buffer. A merchant with savings could endure temporary downturns. An estate manager could rely on stored grain. An administrator had access to information before panic spread. A teacher retained social capital even during economic contraction. These buffers created breathing space. Breathing space created dignity. Dignity created a life that felt stable rather than reactive. It is worth remembering that Rome did not operate with modern labor protections. There were no guaranteed wages for the majority of workers. No unemployment safety net. No structured retirement beyond specific military provisions. So security had to be built through positioning. Positioning inside durable systems. Positioning inside trusted networks. Positioning inside institutions that could not simply vanish overnight. And the jobs that allowed that positioning were the ones most people, if given the choice, would have wanted. Even culturally, these roles carried respect. Roman moral philosophy often praised moderation, discipline, and responsibility. The steady administrator embodied those virtues. The reliable merchant reflected prudence. The thoughtful jurist displayed gravitas. A life built around these values aligned not only with survival, but with social esteem. And esteem reinforced opportunity. Opportunity reinforced stability. Stability reinforced longevity. The cycle is consistent. If you imagine growing older in Rome, seeing your children educated, perhaps entering similar professions, you begin to see how these jobs created generational continuity. A father who was a respected teacher could educate his son. A merchant could introduce his children to established trade partners. An administrator could secure mentorship for the next generation. Professional networks became family networks. Family networks became long-term insulation. That intergenerational effect is the quiet power behind these professions. They were not isolated jobs. They were embedded roles within social systems, and embedded roles endure. In contrast, roles dependent entirely on physical output or momentary demand rarely provided such inheritance of stability. They were immediate but not cumulative. The best Roman jobs were cumulative. They accumulated trust. They accumulated skill. They accumulated relationships. They accumulated standing. And accumulation over time becomes security. So when we return to the original question, which jobs in ancient Rome would you actually want? The final answer feels steady rather than dramatic. You would want to be where order lived, in the courts rather than the quarries, in the counting rooms rather than the loading docks, in the classrooms rather than the fields, in the planning chambers rather than the front lines. Not because those other roles were unimportant, they were vital, but because the structured professions offered insulation, longevity, and alignment with Rome's enduring systems. Rome may have dazzled the world with monuments and military power, but it survived because of administrators, engineers, merchants, teachers, surveyors, and legal minds. And if you were living there, seeking not glory but grounded security, you would quietly choose to stand among them. Because in the ancient world, the truest measure of a good job was not wealth or fame. It was whether your life could remain steady as the empire turned. And the professions woven into Rome's systems of order were the ones most likely to grant that steadiness. That is where the best Roman jobs truly lived. Not in the spotlight, but in the structure that held everything together. If we take one final, quiet step back from the marble monuments and the dramatic histories, what remains is something much more grounded. Ancient Rome was a civilization of systems. It had systems for taxation, systems for law, systems for trade, systems for infrastructure, systems for education. And the most desirable jobs were the ones that sat inside those systems, not outside them. To live inside a system is to benefit from its continuity. If the tax system continues, the tax administrator continues. If trade continues, the merchant continues. If law continues, the jurist continues. If cities continue to grow, the engineer continues. The deeper your profession was embedded in a recurring structure, the safer your long-term prospects. Rome was not static, but its foundational needs were constant. Grain had to be supplied. Roads had to be maintained. Water had to be delivered. Contracts had to be honored. Young elites had to be educated. Those needs did not disappear with political turbulence. They did not vanish with the passing of one emperor. They were ongoing. An ongoing need is the foundation of professional security. There is also something telling about how Rome handled authority. While emperors commanded the empire, they relied heavily on administrators, scribes, accountants, and provincial officials. The empire functioned through delegation. Delegation creates opportunity. It creates layers beneath visible power where skilled individuals can operate with relative stability. A provincial financial officer might never be famous, but he could hold influence locally for decades. A master builder might never enter the Senate, but he could shape a city's skyline permanently. A teacher might never command legions, but he could shape the thinking of those who did. These were roles of sustained impact. Impact without constant exposure. Exposure is dangerous. Impact within structure is durable. Another advantage of these professions lies in adaptability. Rome's borders expanded and contracted. Its political structures evolved. Its economy shifted across regions. But literacy, calculation, coordination, and instruction remained relevant across all phases. A merchant could pivot to new markets. An administrator could serve under new leadership. A teacher could instruct the next generation in changing circumstances. An engineer could adjust to different terrains and needs. Adaptable skill is resilient skill. Resilient skill creates confidence. Confidence reduces fear, and fear was a real factor in ancient life. The difference between living reactively and living with foresight is profound. Those in structured professions could anticipate change. They handled information early. They adjusted plans before crisis became catastrophe. That ability to anticipate, to manage rather than merely endure, defined quality of life. Even socially, these roles provided insulation. A respected jurist had clients who valued him. A reliable merchant had partners invested in his success. A teacher had families who trusted his instruction. Trust creates networks. Networks create support. Support reduces isolation. Isolation is dangerous in hierarchical societies. The best Roman jobs minimized isolation. They connected you to others through recurring, structured interaction. And perhaps most importantly, they allowed your value to grow over time rather than diminish. Time is often cruel to physical laborers. Time is kind to experienced professionals. The older administrator becomes wiser. The seasoned merchant becomes more strategic. The veteran teacher becomes more respected. The experienced engineer becomes more precise. Time compounds expertise, and compounded expertise creates authority. Authority, even modest authority, provides protection. So when we answer the question one last time, which jobs in ancient Rome would you actually want? The answer becomes less romantic and more rational. You would choose durability over drama. You would choose structure over spectacle. You would choose roles where knowledge outweighs muscle. You would choose to become necessary to Rome's systems of order. Because Rome endured not through chaos, but through coordination. And the people who prospered most consistently were those who mastered that coordination. In the end, the best Roman jobs were not about climbing to the top. They were about anchoring yourself in the middle, where systems functioned steadily, where reputation accumulated gradually, and where life could unfold with a measure of predictability. In a world without modern safeguards, predictability was priceless. And predictability lived inside Rome's structures. That is where you would want to stand, not at the edge of uncertainty, but in the quiet center of continuity, where your work aligned with the empire's enduring order, and where your life could move forward without constant fear of collapse. That was the real privilege of a good job in ancient Rome. Not glory, not excess, but steadiness within a civilization built to last.